Watch part 1 to understand what's going on. Additionally, the background footage for this video comes courtesy of the Wheels of LoL mod for Skyrim, which is a mod that references many of the themes we will talk about today, albeit through different creative lenses, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. Welcome everyone to the home of the mainspring Everwound, where it is finally time to talk about the Truth in Sequence, widely considered to be the best piece of writing to ever come out of the Elder Scrolls Online, and managing to bring the weird side of Elder Scrolls lore to a completely new player base. These books are legendary. The influence of these 12 books within the fanbase cannot be overstated. But what are they really? What are they talking about? Are they really the words of Sothasil? Or are they merely the words of a bunch of fanatical worshippers that serve him and have lost the plot along the way? And what are the influences behind them? Today we will attempt to answer all of these questions. But first, I have to make an important observation. All of these sermons begin with this epigraph, taken from the sermons of Dildris Morvain, 4th Torbjorn, yes that's how you pronounce it, to the mainspring Everwound. The Truth in Sequence has not a single direct quote from Sothasil within it. It is inspired by what Sothasil said, and once or twice he does talk in them, but even then, I would argue that it's Dildris Morvain giving second-hand information on highly fictionalized events that Sothasil was involved in. Sothasil has not written or even referenced a single line within the Truth in Sequence. But here is the kicker. Everyone in the Clockwork City thinks that it's all his.
Commit your small blasphemies, he'd say. The fire of doubt turns ignorance to steam.
And they're not reading some kind of altered version of the Truth in Sequence, where instead of saying, taken from the sermons of Dildris Morvain, it instead says, thus spoke Sothasil. In fact, as we will see, in the very first sermon, Dildris clearly states that she speaks Sothasil's truth as she knows it. But such is the nature of these sermons and Clockwork City society that people know so little about Sothasil, who barely shows up, and even when he does show up, it's only for a matter of moments, that they are willing to believe that these sermons come from him, even if this was done indirectly. After all, the Torbjorn is the highest ranking Clockwork Apostle. She has to know something about him, right? But Sothasil doesn't pick the Torbjorn. The Congress of Calibrations picks her, and the Congress is just made up of other apostles. I guess Sothasil is known to recruit some apostles directly by appearing to them, but throughout these 12 sermons, Dildris Morvain, whom for the rest of this video I will just call Dildris or the Torbjorn, does not describe a single encounter that she has ever had with Sothasil. I think she has never met him, and if she has, I'm guessing she just heard a few of his lectures or read a book or two that was written by him. I will say this as well, everyone in the Clockwork City, from the apostles to the commoners to the authors of various books found within the Clockwork City, quotes verses from the Truth in Sequence saying that these are the words of Sothasil, when, again, Dildris says clearly that this is Sothasil's truth as she knows it.
The sermons tell us that only the disassembled engine can be scrubbed and made clean.
I have important business back in Vardenfell. I can't be late. I need to leave.
Forward, it cries. Forward to the fruits of cheap ambition. Forward to the promise of everlasting kingdoms.
By the word, I wind the gears.
But you know who has never even come close to quoting anything from the Truth in Sequence?
My mom!
Sothasil. Does that mean that the Truth in Sequence is just a bunch of hoopla? No, far from it, though that angle certainly warrants some analysis. But in fact, it can be said that it was Sothasil's wish for things to turn out this way. And not only that, Dildris Morvain's knowledge about the Elder Scrolls universe is up there with characters like Mankar Camoran and Vivek. She knows so much. It's a miracle her head hasn't exploded yet. A lot of it is highly contested information, with a smidgen of propaganda in there, just for good measure. But a lot of it is also highly insightful. You know what the level of knowledge in the Truth in Sequence reminds me of? Ever read those ancient books written about 2000 years ago from places such as ancient Greece and Rome, and people back then knew so much about math, physics, philosophy, and even astronomy, but at the same time they didn't know what gravity was and thought that good health back then was based on having 4 humors in your body, being in good balance? The Truth in Sequence feels like it's on that level level of knowledge. It gets a lot of things shockingly right, and a lot of other things shockingly wrong, or if you want to be polite about it, it's inaccurate. It is also important to keep in mind that these sermons were written in a different context than the two other in-universe religious texts that they are based out of. Those would be the 36 Sermons of Vivek and the commentaries on the Mysterium Zaxis. The 36 Lessons of Vivek were written by a self-obsessed poet who is perfectly aware that he's just a liar and has no problem telling stories to his people and embellishing them with mysterious terms, and also has mental issues. The commentaries on the Mysterium Zaxis were written by an egotistical orphan who believed that the god of destruction should take control of Nirn so that the world may be reset to a lawless state, so that everyone can have true freedom. With the commentaries, he wants to recruit people to his cult, so he uses flowery and elegant terms. And he also has mental issues. Deldris has no mental issues, so massive progress happening there. But more than that, she's writing these documents specifically because she wants others to understand Sothasil as she does. She doesn't need to persuade anyone to follow her. Remember, if you made it to the Clockwork City, you are either fully on board or there is no way out for you anyway, since the apostles won't let anyone leave. The Clockwork City is a secluded realm anyway. These documents were never intended to spread to the masses outside Set's realm. Because of this, they have by far the simplest vocabulary out of all these religious texts. To show you this, I want to read one line each from the Truth in Sequence, the Lessons of Vivek, and the commentaries of Mankar that say basically the same thing, just so you can see the difference. So here we go, and remember, what all these lines are trying to say is unbind yourself from the actions and lives of your ancestors and do not act as they did. Lessons of Vivek, for we go different and in thunder. Sithased is the start of all true houses, built against stasis and lazy slaves. Turn from your predilections, broken like false maps. Move and move like this, quicken against false fathers. Mothers left in corners, weeping for glass and rain. Stasis asks merely for nothing, for itself, which is nothing. Commentaries on the Mysterium Zaxis. We immortals leave the dreaming sleeve of birth the same, unmantled, save for the symbiosis with our mothers, thus to practice and thus to rapprochement, until finally we might through new eyes leave our hearths, without need or fear that she remains behind. In this moment we destroy her forever, and enter the domain of Lord Dagon. The Truth in Sequence. In the time before our father's rise, old and feeble knowledge ruled the hearts of Mer. The children of Ash entered their ancestral tombs, not in search of truth, but in search of truth's corpse. They saw their forebears, not as proud and vigorous guides, but as wheezing, toothless ghosts, guardians of the musty and derelict engine that fools call deep wisdom. You must smash these old machines, child of Set. You see what I mean? Good for me, honestly. I no longer have to play the same verses at least twice before analyzing them. Firstly, it's impressive that Deldris is up there, intellectually, with Mankar and Vivek, but even more interesting than that is that she's not insane, and she doesn't try to entirely confuse people. She's not an egomaniacal poet who killed his best friend, or a demonic cult leader. She's just a researcher who is really devoted to Sothasil. There are a few odd terms every now and again, but they're on the easier side of things, and this I think is warranted. As I said in part 1 of this video, the Truth in Sequence is by far the most philosophical text out of all of them. Only a few Elder Scrolls events are mentioned. It's mostly metaphysics and cosmology. However, life cannot be too easy for us, and just by reading the first line, Forth Torbjorn to the mainspring Everwound, you may have noticed something. There are way too many allegories to mechanical clocks and mechanical clock components in these sermons, so much so that in order to understand them properly, I have to give a quick tutorial on how mechanical clocks work. I can assure you, this is completely necessary and actually interesting. I'm gonna talk specifically about mechanical clocks. No electricity allowed. All mechanical watches are powered by the same mechanism, a long, metallic, thin spring called the mainspring. When the mainspring becomes wound, it seeks to unwind itself, and in doing so, it releases stored energy generated during the winding motion. This stored energy is used to power the clock's mechanisms. There are several ways of winding the spring. Some models use gravity, some have a winding key, like those you see in some toys, and others just have a mechanism that you have to activate. When the spring unwinds itself, the energy goes to the gears. Why gears? Well, put simply, because they help consume the energy more slowly and throughout a fixed span of time, as without them, the main spring can unwind itself in a matter of seconds. The first gear that is turned due to the unwinding of the mainspring is called the Great Gear. If a gear has 20 or more teeth, it's called a wheel. If it has less than 20, it's called a pinion. The entire set of gears within a watch is called the gear train. From the wheels, we go to the escapement mechanism. These can take a bunch of forms, but they all serve the same purpose. They control the frequency rate of each spin of the gears, locking and unlocking them repeatedly, releasing energy in tiny pulses. Again, so the energy doesn't deplete itself in a matter of seconds, and so the clock can show the time properly in an accurate rhythm. From here we go to the balance wheel, or oscillation wheel, as it's also called. These are both terms that refer to the oscillator. The pulses generated by the escapement mechanism also serve to move the oscillator, which then swings back and forth in a very fast and very precise frequency. In a pendulum clock, those would be the old giant clocks that your grandpa might have, that you would just stare at for a while because they sound nice. The pendulum is the oscillator. It goes back and forth quickly in a precise frequency. Each swing controls the ticking rate of the clock, and it also determines the accuracy of the clock. The time indicating arrows move in accordance with the movements of all these components to provide us with the time. All of this is gonna be referenced in the Truth in Sequence, and we will keep coming back to these mechanical components time and time again. First of all, how cool is this? I just gave a tutorial on how mechanical clocks work in a video about Elder Scrolls Metaphysics, and there's more, because we still haven't addressed the two elephants in the room. Fourth tourbillon to the mainspring Everwound. What's a tourbillon? Okay, all of this was your basic introduction into clockmaking. Now we're gonna get into the little more advanced stuff. We're gonna introduce physics into the equation. You are in for a hell of a video, buddy. So all that we just talked about applies equally to both large and small watches. Small watches are made of the exact same components, but the mainspring is wound by a battery and it's automatic. Here is one crucial difference between a large watch and one you would have in your pocket or your wrist. If a watch is small and it also moves because you carry it with you, the components of it are gonna be a lot more delicate. Now here's the deal. They are not delicate only because of wear and tear, they are also delicate because of gravity itself. See, a large clock that's placed in a wall is pushed by gravity only downwards. There is very little force applied to it due to gravity, and it's only pushed in one direction. If you leave a small watch on your desk before you go to bed and it's placed on its left side, gravity is only gonna pull it down towards the left side, and in the morning when you wear it again, gravity will pull it on a different side. This is a very minimal difference, by all means minuscule. However, there are a lot of mechanical clock nerds out there. It's a highly prestigious job, a very technical one, and there are even competitions taking place for who can make the best watches. So these minuscule inaccuracies caused by gravity were a massive issue for them until a new form of keeping the clock in place was invented by Abraham Louis Brigham in 1801. So instead of letting the volatile parts wear and tear due to gravity pulling them and placing them out of position ever so slightly, why not place them all in a rotating cage inside the watch, using energy from the mainspring to rotate it? That way, gravity can mess up their position because they are no longer still. Genius! Also, it looks very pretty. Look at this thing. So essentially, the tourbillon holds things together so they won't sustain as much damage over time due to gravity. So now we know what Dildris Mauvain's position is. She's here to keep everyone in line, but there is also something else I have to tell you. The second part, the mainspring Everwound, is so facile. Here is the issue though. A mainspring cannot be everwound. It can be overwound, but it cannot wind itself indefinitely because it violates the first two laws of thermodynamics. Those will be the laws of conservation of energy and the second one on entropy and friction. I'm gonna be brief here because we already talked about a lot. The TLDR is this: perpetual motion machines, which is what an everwound mainspring is, are fundamentally impossible because energy, such as the one needed to wind the mainspring, cannot be created, only converted and transferred. But the law of entropy states that when energy is transferred, it creates friction in the form of heat, which slowly depletes the energy within the mechanism. Therefore, a mainspring cannot be everwound. You cannot make energy, you can only transfer it and convert it, and when you do so, said energy is diminished. So why is Sothasil called something impossible? Well, let's find out. During Sermon 1. Sermon 1. Taken from the Sermons of Dildris Morvain, 4th Tourbillon, to the mainspring Everwound. So again, Tourbillon holds the clock together and steady. Mainspring Everwound. Mainspring is a spring that powers the clock, and it cannot be Everwound. So something is up with that. And then Dildris doesn't spend a single second messing around with us. By the word, I wind the gears. The first sentence is literally an Aleister Crowley reference. Aleister Crowley was an early 20th century occultist who wrote a document called the Book of the Law, and the main thesis of that book is that everyone has a place within the cosmos. Everyone has a will, and for that will to be true, it must be preceded by love. Love therefore is the law that brings forth true will. Note, this is merely the interpretation given for the purposes of making sense of the 36 sermons of Vivek, and now the truth in sequence. People have analyzed the Book of the Law about 1,000 different ways. However, for the purposes of this video, I think this is the more appropriate one, because as we saw during Sothasil and the Scribe, what prohibited Sothasil from developing an ego that would allow him to become a prisoner is him not loving others. He liked other people and he loved Tamriel, but he did not love them, which is why having knowledge of the world made him what he is now, whereas someone like Vivek and Talos used that knowledge in different ways, more aligned with the concept of true will. The quote can also be a reference to the sermons of Vivek, when Vivek says the ending of the words is Amsivi, but then again, that's a Crowley reference too, so it checks out either way. But what does by the word I wind the gears actually mean? It means that with what Dildris is about to say, we will change, since we are the gears. She talks about that later, and by talking to us, she will change us, wind us, as she refers to this process, in a specific way, and presumably towards some end, and then she introduces us to the main reason for creating this piece of work. How does one come to know the Clockwork God and Father of Mysteries? Our Lord Vivek and the Lady of Mercy, Amalexia, are known to us. Their faces are known to us. Their words are known to us. But what of Sothasil, he who is distant in both position and intent, ever watchful but seldom seen, ever worshipped but seldom heard? The idea that Sothasil is so mysterious to even his closest followers that they don't even know what his face looks like is certainly something that would cause even the most faithful person to say, why are we worshipping this guy? Vivek and Amalexia talk to their people. Amalexia is in a temple in the center of Mournhold, and Vivek writes stuff all the time. Sothasil does neither of that. He has no written pieces of work that we know of. He stays in the Cognitum Centralis for hundreds of years. At best, someone might find him giving a lecture once in a blue moon, or be chosen by him to become a clockwork apostle, or once in a really great while, he might give them a special task. People don't know him, but he knows them. People worship him, but what are they worshipping actually? That's the issue, and it's one that Dildris seeks to remedy. He is the mainspring Everwound, the unmoved mover, hidden within his clockwork city, whose voice is the divine metronome. As Tourbillon, I speak his truth as I know it. Now the plot thickens, and some of the terms that we've encountered begin to be elaborated upon. Sothasil is someone who is stagnant. He knows what is and what will be. He never changes, he just acts based on what he is, according to Dildris. But it's exactly that stillness that enables others to move. Now we know what mainspring Everwound means a bit better. Sothasil moves and causes movement without changing, thus he's forever fixed in stasis, and based on that, the clock still works. Imagine it like the actual clock's mainspring, moving eternally, but without changing its state, thus never unwinding, but still changing the rest of the mechanism. Now, you have all probably seen a metronome. They are those little devices that make regularly repeating ticks. Interestingly, that tick-tock noise that comes from a pendulum clock is a form of metronome, or to be more accurate, the balance wheel and the pendulum that generate frequencies and therefore the sound are like metronomes. Sothasil's voice is how the world moves. His actions, however few they may be, are divine manifestations of the state of the world and how it changes. But in spite of that, we will not hear those words or his truth, not directly at least. Dildris will speak his truth as she knows it. Obviously, this can mean anything from everything here is true and Dildris is the biggest Sothasil fangirl out there to she got some stuff right, she got some stuff wrong, and all the way down to everything she's talking about is made up in her own mind after thinking about Sothasil way too much and hardly if ever interacting with him. Now let's see exactly how is she gonna say all these things to us. I say the words in sequence so they can be known by the people. The sequence is but a shadow of the truth, but minds such as ours cannot bear the ordered and sequence. Minds such as ours cannot truly know themselves, not yet. It is a big part during the sermons of Vivek that words have higher, subconscious meanings behind them, but she doesn't approach this topic with the same mystique as Vivek. Rather, she seems to be a bit more sorrowful about it. Language to her is a sequence of ideas transported from one person to another via vocal sequences, or in the case of writing, written sequence. This is why we understand what an object is by merely speaking the word that represents it. We associate the item with the vocal, thus language has a sequence. But this too isn't the whole story. There are forms beyond the sequence of language. Words are only shadows of the truth about the concepts that we are discussing when we talk. But according to Deldris, we have neither the knowledge nor the ability to obtain the knowledge of these true forms as we are right now. This might not be as true for basic terms such as a chair, but what about other words? Does one understand the meaning of the words order, God, or world merely by saying the words? According to the Tourbillon, no. But the idea still goes through from one person to another, even if the words are nothing but flawed imitations, as we will call them later, simulacrums, of the truth behind them. Obviously, everything here is very inspired by Plato and his idea of perfect forms. Every object has an ideal form, which exists in a different metaphysical realm, and when we say words that relate to those forms, we refer only to flawed imitations of those ideal forms. We are only one paragraph in, and we have already talked about Plato and Crowley. So as to where this video goes from this point on, all bets are off, though the thumbnail may have given you an idea. Now we have to embark on a process that will make us understand the ideal state of things, and we will do this by learning the truths of Sothasil. According to the Tourbillon, the first truth of the mainspring Everwound is the truth of Nirn. The soul of Nirn has two faces. The first is known to us, the Nirn prior, or the Nirn of many parts. It is a Nirn in pieces, assembled by the unsteady hand that has yet to find itself. Its oscillations irregular, its going train disrupted by fear and delusion. Its faults are not in its parts, but in its assembly. Each gear is a god, each spring is a thought, but a mechanism built by many hands cannot know the precision of the master craftsman. Here is where we introduce to the main metaphysical thesis of the truth in sequence. But first of all, what is a soul? I'm gonna go for Plato's logic in his book Phaedon, and by the way, technically, Socrates is saying all this. The soul like that is divine, immortal, intelligible, uniform, indissoluble, and always the same as itself. It is also important to note that later on in this book, Socrates says this, which is important to us now, and will be even more so in the next paragraph of the truth in sequence. Then the soul, as it appears, will never admit the opposite of what it always brings with it, and we have seen that the opposite of life is death. Therefore, the soul will never admit death. Hence, the soul is immortal. So Nirn's soul is split into two. The one part we know and the other one we don't. The one we know of goes by these names: the Nirn prior, or the Nirn of many parts. It is a shattered world, flawed, made by an unsteady hand, though we don't know who that is just yet. Its oscillations are not in harmony, they tick and talk at random. The gear train of Nirn is disrupted by wrongful emotions, such as fear and delusion, but all those parts of Nirn are not to be blamed for this. Nirn is Nirn. The soul is all those things that we've talked about, but its parts have been assembled the wrong way. There is again a tiny little Crowleyism there, but instead of saying each star is a god, it says each gear is a god. Keep in mind, the mortals are the gears of Nirn, so every soul within Nirn has a divine element within it. So we see that something has gone wrong with Nirn. A construction has gone wrong here, and many hands have assembled something wrong, without the precision of the master craftsman. That would be Sothasil. But whose fault is this? The Ada gears cannot bring forth a true Nirn, because they know only its parts. They cannot see the whole. The eye of Sothasil ignores such divisions. Where the broken gods see only pieces, our father Sothasil sees the whole. He sees the second Nirn. Here is where we start to see what makes this world Nirn flawed. Individual perspectives. The idea of the self is what is stopping Nirn from becoming the perfect, immortal realm that it can be, and the makers of Nirn, the Adada, made this flawed creation as a result of their ignorance. They can't see the whole of Nirn, they can only see its parts, and that error, born from wrongful perspective, has made a flawed world. But Sothasil can see the whole. He ignores divisions born from ignorant, selfish perspectives. He sees the second part of Nirn's soul, the second Nirn, the incoherent Nirn and Suin, the thought form that anticipates the world to come. Tamriel Final, Anu Vanasi. Only Sothasil knows its shape. If you know one concept about the truth in sequence, it's Anu Vanasi. Before we break down the term itself, let us look at what it means. Nirn, as in the Nirn Prior, is only a stepping stone for the second Nirn, Anu Vanasi. Let's make it clear. Right now, there is a Nirn Prior, a broken realm made by flawed creators that only serves one purpose, to bring about a second Nirn, and from that Nirn, a new world will come called Tamriel Final, Anu Vanasi. The only way we can make sense of the word thought form is by using Plato's idea of ideal forms that we've talked about. The Nirn Prior and the Nirn Ensuing are the same physically. It's not a different Nirn. The Nirn Ensuing is Nirn's ideal form, that which exists in a different, immaterial realm, and here the Torbjorn says that this ideal form, via its realization, will bring forth a new physical world as a result of the change in the minds of the people. This world is known by two different names, Tamriel Final, Anu Vanasi. Only Sothasil knows the shape of this world. So back to the original question, what does Anu Vanasi mean? Anu is the god of everlasting order in the Elder Scrolls universe. Nirvana is the ultimate state of enlightenment in a person according to Buddhism, and C is Sothasil as an aspect of the one god that is split into three, called the Sivi. So Anu Vanasi would mean something like Anu's enlightenment due to Sothasil, or Sothasil's enlightenment of Anu. The details are up to you. The main point is the same. Sothasil seeks to bring forth the ultimate state of Anu. He seeks to remedy the ignorance of all of Anu's forms. But how did Anu get to this? And most important of all, how did it get to such a mess where ignorance is everywhere? Is Anu ignorant, or are the people of Nirn outside Anu? Its nature lies forgotten in the before time, when Anu broke itself for wisdom's sake. Our lessons know this source as two forms, Anu and Parome, but this binary is without merit, one of Lorkhan's great lies, meant to sunder us from the truth of Anuic unity. Our father, Sothasil, would have us know the truth. There is no Parome. Parome is the absence of value, a lack, a ghost that vanishes at first light, and nothing. There is only Anu, sundered and known by many names, possessing many faces, the One. There is plenty to unpack with these lines. We have to take them almost word for word. Again, notice how barely anything is mystical or metaphorical. It's just simple explanations. So, linear time in the Elder Scrolls begins with a being known as Auriel. All of these beings are incorporeal, by the way, so don't take these statues at face value. You may know Auriel by his imperial name, Akatosh, though some difference between the two does exist. About Auriel in particular, the book, the Monomyth, says this: aspects of the Orbis then asked for a schedule to follow, or procedures, whereby they might enjoy themselves a little longer outside of perfect knowledge. So that he might know himself this way too, Anu created Auriel, the soul of his soul. Auriel bled through the Orbis as a new force, called time. With time, various aspects of the Orbis began to understand their nature and limitations. Anu broke himself in order to understand himself, and all of the people of Nirn and the Edada are smaller parts of Anu seeking to know themselves and understand their nature. All of this I would consider standard Elder Scrolls lore, but here is where the Torbjorn says something new. The two entities that made the world with their interplay were Anu and his other, everlasting perfect knowledge and inexpressible action, Parome. But here Dildris says that Parome doesn't actually exist, but is rather part of a lie told by Lorkhan, the spirit that created the mortal world. But here he takes a different form. Lorkhan had found the Adric weakness. While each rebel was, by their nature, immeasurable, they were, through jealousy and vanity, also separate from each other. They were also unwilling to go back to the nothing of before. So while they ruled their false dominions, Lorkhan filled the void with a myriad of new ideas. These ideas were legion, and soon it seemed like Lorkhan had a dominion of his own, with slaves and everlasting imperfection, and he seemed, for all the world, like an Aedra. Thus did he present himself as such to the demon Anuiel and the Eight Givers as a friend. So basically, the timeline so far is as follows. Anu is one. This one breaks itself to know itself, and from that point, multitudes crawl out of Anu and seek to go outside his perfect knowledge, and Anu does the same by making Auriel, which then enables everyone to understand their own nature and limitations. And then Lorkhan comes by and realizes that all these spirits, although immeasurable, were separated from one another and unwilling to go back to Anu once they realized themselves. realms, so he tells them to go create a new realm of everlasting imperfection, though they didn't know that, and they became slaves to him, and he got to masquerade himself as one of them, when he's not. He lied to them about many things, and one of them was the existence of inexplicable action, meaning chaos, which is parome. There was never any action that was done inexpressibly or inexplicably. It was all done by Anu so he can understand himself. The very concept of chaos and disorder was made by Lorcan to take everyone away from Anu's complete unity. And although Lorcan does exist, his lies do not. Parome is what happens when they lost sight of what they were here to do, which is self-fathoming, and therefore possessing understanding of the world, which is Anu. When people and spirits lose sight of that, they fall into an emptiness, and that emptiness is parome. This is something that apparently Sothasio has said, which is interesting because when we were talking to him, he never said anything like that, although you could say that he kinda hinted at it when he said,
"Others believe in chaos. They think their choices give them agency. I know differently, and yet I find myself hesitating."
So maybe that illusion of chaos is parome, not an inexplicable action as the monomyth puts it, but an action born from ignorance of what it really seeks to do. I want to read this last line again because it's essential in all of this. There is only Anu, Sandert, and known by many names, possessing many faces. The one, everyone in the Elder Scrolls, is Anu. He is every name and every face. Individual identity is something that Anu made so he can know himself, and then those understandings of him drifted further and further away from the perfect knowledge of his unity. And then Lorcan came by and lied to everyone even more. Lorcan didn't begin this process of distancing from Anu. Anu did, but that being said, he certainly pushed everyone even further apart from Anu. I want to evaluate Deldrisa's statements here within the greater context of the setting. I will do this a few times throughout the video when she talks about drastically different interpretations of the universe, because it gives way for some good discussion. If anything, more fuel for thought. First of all this has a distinct Mankar Camoran vibe to it, doesn't it? For those of you that don't know, Mankar Camoran wanted nothing more than to return to a state of existence before the Aedra decided the rules of the world. In this way, the limitations created by the Aedra would no longer apply. Therefore, absolute freedom, void of limitations, could be achieved for the whole of Nirn. Both Mankar and the Tourbillon want to return to a past that was hijacked by something wicked, a purity long lost to them that they now seek to restore with their actions. The one key difference between them is their opinion of the creator of the mortal realm, Lorcan. The Tourbillon views Lorcan as a flawed creator who made a terrible creation and lied to everyone so that they may forget their true identities as aspects of Anu. And we're just in the beginning. She has plenty more accusations to make about Lorcan. How dare she? Mankar, on the other hand, has this to say about Lorcan instead: eat or bleed dry the gun forlorn, and gain that small will that led them to walk the path of Godhead at the first, spit out or burn to the side that which made them delay. Essentially, be like Lorcan, but don't repeat his failure. And I hate to admit this, because the lessons of Vivek also make a pretty persuasive argument in favor of Lorcan, but Deldris also provides a very complete picture. Like, in the sermons of Vivek, it mentions that Lorcan suffered so that everyone can have a chance to know themselves and become something greater than Anu, and in order to do so, he was willing to sacrifice himself and then be killed. And Vivek goes in depth, supposedly talking with the words of Boethia about this sacrifice in order for everyone to become something more. But way later down the line, in Sermon 37, he just tells the reader, oh, by the way, most of you are destined to die, and at best, you are stepping stones for others to ascend, and hopefully through them, you can become something more as well. Or at the very least, your suffering can mean something. So maybe Lorcan did just want to enslave the lesser spirits so he can make a playground for his ascension. He did ultimately ascend by becoming Talos. It can be both ways. He could have wanted everyone to ascend and himself. We can never know, because Lorcan died after the rules of the world were established. Who knows? Maybe there is even an entity out there that allows for the merging of individual desires with collective memories. But there is something else we have to talk about too, and it's something Mankar already introduced us to in that one line earlier. the Godhead. Is Anu the Godhead? And the answer to that question would have to depend on your definition of Godhead. We know the Godhead is a real concept in the Elder Scrolls. We just read about it. But what it is exactly is a mystery that will have to stay a mystery. In another book called The Progress of Truth, Godhead is described as gaining apotheosis, essentially going from a mortal being to becoming a god. Is Anu a mortal that became a god? No, there is nothing to suggest that. Though, if we believe in what the Torbjorn is saying here, that would mean that mortals are in the process of becoming Anu. So maybe the reverse is true. So maybe you can present it that way. Another theory about the Godhead is that everyone is a part of a much greater entity from which they all originate from, and that entity is called the Godhead. And when I mean everything originates from the Godhead, I do mean everything. The entire universe plays out within the Godhead. This term comes from Munkar, from the passage we read about earlier, and also from reading in between the lines of what Dagoth Ur said. In the case of Munkar, that would be that Lorcan embarked on a journey to act and be the same as the creator of everything. So, with all that said, is Anu the Godhead of the Tess universe? The way Deldris Mulvaney is talking about it, yes, Anu is everything. He is within everyone. If what we are reading here is in fact the truth, then Anu is within everyone. Anu is therefore the Godhead. But those are a lot of ifs and buts. We need to know more. So let's keep reading. When Anu broke itself, it did so to understand its nature. In its sundering, the values that swam in its vastness sought to know themselves. The Ed Adagirs gave themselves many names and set their will to building. Alas, they heeded the counsel of Lorcan and forgot the face of Anu. They thought themselves distinct and whole, and so many hands assembled the world, each with separate intention and selfish purpose. The Nirn of many parts was the result, a broken and leaking steamship that lists ever windward. Now the connection made between Lorcan and Anu becomes even greater. Anu broke himself to know himself, and Lorcan did the same. Sort of. Therefore, if we are to assume that what Munkar said about Lorcan is in fact correct, then yes, Lorcan walked like Anu did, and that would make Anu the Godhead, since again, Lorcan walked the path of Godhead. Here Deldris also describes the story of creation the same way that the book Sithis that we read earlier describes it. The Edada that came from the sundering of Anu started making their own worlds until Lorcan tricked them into making the mortal world. But here we also see another dimension of Lorcan's great lie. He made them forget the face of Anu. Mind you, Anu doesn't have an actual face. She is referring to the traits of Anu and the state that one is in whilst united with Anu, the everlasting perfect knowledge. Here we learn exactly how the world became flawed. It wasn't just Lorcan's intentions, whatever they may have been, that made the world a mess. It's also the separate intentions of the creators themselves. Each Aedra gave to the world those parts of themselves that they deemed as ideal and paramount. Julianus does not understand love the way Mara does. Mara and Debella have different understandings of love, yet each Aedra views their traits as paramount. These contradictions were brought to the world. Each of the Adada clinged on to their own personalities, to their own egos, not realizing that they all originate from the same point, thus creating a flawed world that cannot know stability. By saying that lists ever windwards, the Torbjorn is saying the world changes courses all the time, based on whatever is going on at the time. If there is peace, the world goes one way. If there is war, the world goes another way, and each state gives way to the other, but to no discernible end. It's all made to satisfy desires born of a flawed perception given by the Aedra. But Deldris does have a remedy for all that. But rejoice, children of the Tribunal. In his wisdom, the mainspring Everwound seeks to reclaim our lost heritage. His heart is oiled and calibrated, pumping dark truth as blood. His mind is the god mortar, where the fractured values of Anuic nature are ground and weighed, unified through his will alone. From this great labor, a new Nirn will be born, Tamriel final, Anu Vanasi. I pray that we see the fruits of his labor, a perfect world without Ed Adagirs, without the illusion of change, watertight and everlasting. Sothasil, through his will, that rhymed, seeks to reclaim the face of Anu. He speaks truths that can cause great distress to those who cling on to the flaws generated by the Edada, and his mind can take those fractured values that came from Anu's sundering and he unifies them once more. And through this process, Anu Vanasi will come to be a perfect world without Edada and their selfishness, an everlasting realm of perfect knowledge. Just like Anu, this is the first instance where I can safely say say that Dildris Mulvane is wrong, or at least to an extent she's wrong. Sothasil has clearly stated what his mission is during both Sothasil and the Scribe, and when we talk to him in ESO.
If the people of Tamriel must exist inside this cell, I will make sure that the walls are stable, the gaps are sealed, and all who remain stay safe within it.
He wants to protect the world so it may keep existing. He isn't the sole instrument of ascension, he is a tool that enables it. And as we can see here, Dildris has obviously missed this point. She's also unable to see a thin line of irony going on with all of this. For those of you that don't get the irony yet, allow me to enlighten you. So, Dildris Mulvane says that Sothasil alone can unify the fractured multitudes that came from Anu, but if she truly believes that by spreading knowledge of this lost Anuic heritage, it can be restored, which she just has stated exactly that, hasn't she been doing the exact same thing this whole time? Dildris is more intelligent than the vast majority of people who live on Nirn, and all of that was because of Sothasil. The Torbjorn has mistaken developing because of someone with development can only come from that someone, and she will do this mistake many times over. She's applying her reverence of godhood to Sothasil's image, and in doing so, she's missing the obvious point that Sothasil isn't the only tool that can lead to this end goal. At times, her hyping up Sothasil as the carrier of the ultimate truth will make these sermons appear as if they are religious propaganda, meant to elevate the position of Sothasil as the ultimate godly being, second only to Anu, and the sermon ends the way it started. By the word, I wind the gears. With these words, the minds of the readers have now been wound towards such truth. Welcome to the section at the end of every sermon. In this little corner, we will focus on one or two major real-life influences behind the truth in sequence. Keep in mind, I'm not inside the head of any writer or developer. I don't know if they were really influenced by any of these. I just find thematic similarities and use them to widen the discussion to any real-life parallels, which there are many. Because I have already mentioned a lot of real-life influences in this sermon, I'm gonna spend this section talking about only one of those influences, the biggest one, in my opinion. The single greatest real-life influence behind the truth in sequence are the writings of Hermes Trismegistus, and in particular, the Corpus Hermetica and Asclepius. But for this section, we will only focus on the Corpus Hermetica. But before even that, who is Hermes Trismegistus? Good question. We are not sure. We have theories, and at least one of them is probably correct. He is believed to be an embodiment of the fusion of two different gods from two different cultures, ancient Greece and ancient Egypt. The first theory states that he's a combination of the god Hermes and Thoth, but the grounds for this theory are kinda shaky, since he hardly resembles any of those two figures. Another theory states that he was an ancient sage, kinda like Socrates, but with a wider reach. This would explain why so many writings attributed to him span such a vast time period, with some stating that he was a contemporary of Moses, and other works attributed to him being written 300 years after the birth of Christ. So people are writing on behalf of him, like Plato did for Socrates. Another theory states that he isn't even a real person, but rather a persona for the archetype of the sage, as it was understood back in antiquity. So the name Hermes Trismegistus might have been used as a false persona that means something like written by an author that possesses certain ideas, with those ideas personified in the figure of Hermes Trismegistus. It's also the case that many ancient writers would be inspired by each other's writings, so the writings attributed to Hermes have a very specific Plato style to them. Whichever the case, and bear in mind, the answer might be a combination of all of them, the ideas of Hermes Trismegistus and the style of writing in his cosmological works, such as the Corpus Hermetica, are almost copy-pasted in the truth in sequence. The writings and the writing style, and even the actual terms used, are extremely similar. This section will focus on the Corpus Hermetica, which is a series of books supposedly authored by Hermes. The main subject of discussion in these books is made clear in the very first lines, and stop me if this sounds at all familiar to you as I read it right now. Hermes, I thought a being more than vast, in size, beyond all bounds. It called out my name and saying, what do you want to hear and see? And what do you have in mind to learn and know? And I do say, who are you? He said, I am the man shepherd, Poemandris, mind of all masterhood. I know what you desire, and am with you everywhere. Hermes, I long to learn of the things that are, and comprehend their nature, nature, and know God. This is, I said, what I desire to hear. And he answered to me, hold in your mind all that you want to know, and I will teach you. So a being comes down to Hermes and tells him that he will teach him everything he wishes to know about God. And what is God's nature according to the shepherd of man? This is the answer. The good is what is inalienable and inseparable from God, since it is God himself. All other immortal gods are given the name good as an honor, but God is good in nature, not because of honor. God has one nature, the good. In God and the good together, there is but one kind, from which comes all other kinds. The good is what gives everything and receives nothing. God gives everything and receives nothing. Therefore, God is the good. So there is a God that is everything, and all comes from it and are it, and that God is the ultimate good. And Hermes seeks to learn about this one God from Poimandres, who is the mind of all masterhood. This is exactly what Deldris is doing with Sothasil, to learn the nature of Anu. And these are just the fundamental similarities. There are so many. I'm just gonna set a few more of the really obvious ones and move on, because we are still in the beginning of all this, and we will keep encountering the Trismegistus all throughout the text on the nature of evil and how this flawed material world came to be. Hermes Trismegistus says the following in the 4th text of the Corpus Hermetica: the greatest evil in mankind is ignorance concerning God. Where are you heading in your drunkenness, you people? Have you swallowed the doctrine of ignorance undiluted, vomiting it up already because you cannot hold it? Stop and sober yourselves up with the eyes of your heart. If not all of you, at least those of you who have the power. The vice of ignorance floods the whole earth and utterly destroys the soul, shutting the body, preventing it from anchoring in the heaven of deliverance. Surely you will not sink in this great flood. Those of you who can will take the ebb and gain the heaven of deliverance and anchor there. Then seek a guide to take you by hand and lead you to the portals of knowledge. There shines the light cleansed of darkness. There no one is drunk, all are sober, and gaze with the heart towards one who wishes to be seen, who is neither heard nor spoken of, who is seen not with the eyes, but with the mind and heart. But first you must rip off the tunic that you wear, the garment of ignorance, the foundation of vice, the bonds of corruption, the dark cage. So again, there is one God who is all, and we are all just ignorant of it. On the nature of the universe, Hermes talks to his mind and says this: the universe is God producing his energy, but God's energy is an insuperable power, not comparable to anything human or divine. Therefore, Hermes, you should not suppose that anything below or anything above is like God, since you would stray from the truth. Nothing is like the unlike, the one and the only. Nor should you suppose that God gives up his power to anything else. Besides him, is there any maker of life and immortality and change? What else might he do but make? God is not idle, else everything would be idle, for each and everything are full of God. Again, this is basically the model of Anu copy-pasted. Important note, we are not talking about the biblical God. On the nature of being more than one God, Poimandres says this: there cannot be two makers, or even more than two. If there are more than one order cannot be kept. The consequence of plurality is envy of the better. I will explain. If there were a second maker of living things mortal and subject to change, he will long to make immortal beings as well, as the maker of immortals would wish to make mortal. Again, very closely resembling Ptolemy. It resembles the legend of him making Sithis and Sithis making Lorcan, all to imitate Anu, making Anuiel and then Oriel. Okay, that's all from Hermes. For now, let's go catch up with the Tourbillon and see what else she has to say about the nature of Nirn. Sermon 2. The wheel of Sothasil is the chrononymic wheel, the nameless wheel. For what is name? The divine metronome tells us that name is the wedge that pries gear from pinion, the residue of Lorcan's great lie that loosens the wheel's chain and corrodes the frame, the Edada gears, named each and each in their way. Now we see the secondary outcomes of Lorcan's great lie. The existence of the very concept of name is a product of ignorance. If all are Anu, trying to realize himself, the names can only be a product of the division experienced from forgetting the face of Anu. Anu possesses all traits, all characteristics, but no physical appearance. He's everything. All are within it. There is nothing greater than Anu, and nothing can exist that isn't it. In fact, I'm calling it it because those are just the pronouns we're used to giving it, or him, but it possesses no gender and no sex. The Edada have names because they possess separate traits, that they manifest. Therefore, when we call to them, we call upon those traits, for they are, in a way, the Etata themselves. So what is the chrononymic wheel? The Nim in the Elder Scrolls is the real name of a being, often Daedra, but according to Mankar, mortals have names too. Nim basically means name, but Nim in this universe can be seen as a carrier of the being's truest intents. Divaithfir describes the Daedric names as parents or formulas that define the being, so something similar must be the case for names in general. Sothasil's chrononymic wheel can be seen as the original desire that led to the creation of the world, which, in this case, is the desire of Anu to fathom himself, in order to enlighten himself. Is this really what Sothasil wants, outside the context of these sermons? Well, yeah, kinda. He wants people to learn, and so he wants to protect them and learn, so kinda like Anu, but he's more fixed on the idea of helping others, which Anu didn't really do. Yet again, assigning traits like that to Anu might mislead people as to what it is. Hello, editing Kotho here. I have tried so hard to put everything in one script, but once again, it seems that I missed one or two things. I want to mention something about the divine metronome. So, in a lot of ancient Greek philosophies, there is the idea of the logos. The logos is an untranslatable word that can mean 5 or 6 different things, but for the sake of this video, you can think of this word as something that means the word or the discourse, but there is a sort of divine reverence to it, and everyone from Plato, the Neoplatonists, the Stoics, Hermes Trismegistus, and even Christians have had their own spin on this concept. It's a very interesting one, and I don't have the time to fully unpack it here, so just know that the logos is something akin to a divine discourse that turns into action. Hermes Trismegistus describes it as something that comes with God, that then applies God's will onto the world. They are on out of light. Logos descended on that nature, God, mind, prior to moist nature, which appeared from darkness. The logos that appeared from mind is Son of God. So, for the purpose of this video, it's good to think of the divine metronome as the logos of Sothasil, and we will see several times throughout these sermons how this word, this voice, manifests in physical ways. That's it, thank you, until we meet again. So we're in the situation, Anu has been forgotten, and Sothasil is trying to restore him. But is all this a good thing or a bad thing? Our lessers know this as a kindness, but the mainspring Everwound calls it a curse, rooted in selfish pride. To name is to cleave one from another. It is the death of Anuic convergence, and the Nirn ensuing, the misassembled dragon that breathes dry falsehood, and whose name is Multitude. This whole thing is very reminiscent of the Corpus Hermetica. Selfish pride here is born out of clinging to false identities. This ignorance destroys Anu's plans to become whole again, and creates the Nirn ensuing. But here, someone you might not expect makes a cameo. Akatosh, the misassembled dragon that created linear time. Akatosh is, essentially, a child of Anu. So why does Dildris describe him as a being that breathes dry falsehood? Because Akatosh too has created lies. He's more like Lorcan than Anu. He too made a flawed world. He too clings on to it. And at the end of the day, he too has a name and traits that he deems as paramount. Why else did he kill Lorcan? Because Lorcan sundered a lot of Oriol's powers and his dominion. It seems that for the Tourbillon, it doesn't matter who you are. If you display the traits that run counter to the unity of Nirn, you are equally guilty of creating a flawed world in her eyes. But why is Akatosh misassembled? Because he possesses multiple, contradicting natures. He was born from Anu, but he has traits and names that he clings on to. After the sundering of Anu, he created linear time where none existed. For whatever reason, Akatosh has ventured too far beyond the face of Anu. And finally, why is his name Multitude? Well, before I say it, I want to inform you that all of this, especially the last line, is again very inspired by the Corpus Hermetica. So here's a quick reading of an interesting quote from the first book of the Hermetica. God, the Master, Maker, Father, and Container of the whole universe, the All who is one, and the One who is all. For the plenitude of all things is one, and is in one, not because the one duplicates itself, but because both are one. For if anyone sets his hand against what seems to be all and identical, and tries to part from the one, taking the term all to mean multitude rather than plenitude, he will be doing the impossible, breaking the all apart from the one, and destroying the all. For all must be one, if in fact one exists as it does, and never ceases to be one, so that the plenitude is not broken apart. I mean, he just said everything. Anything I can say to add add to that is just putting it in Elder Scrolls context. Akatosh, by splitting from Anu and creating his own natures, and I'm using plural there because Akatosh is Oriel, and yes, he's Alduin as well. They possess the same fundamental natures, but different. He has thought of himself as one and distinct from the real one, and has confused the term plenitude, which is Anu's wholeness, with multitude, which is distinctiveness, and in doing so, he and the concepts of time that he represents, no matter which form he takes, have enabled other multitudes to do the same, finding their own identities, their own lies, born from selfishness. I have to pause the metaphysics here and say something important. Dildris? No shot he said that. I don't think Sothasil would say anything remotely close to that. Yes, you might say that he hates having the ability of foresight. We have clearly seen this, and you can argue that this ability is a result of a broken world that can only go one direction, but is unable to see that direction because of ignorance. But he clearly likes the people of Nirn. He isn't calling them selfish, he's calling them unaware, and moreover, he kinda envies people who are ignorant.
Maybe the word I covet above all others.
I think that Dildris is applying an us versus them mentality here. She's letting her own passions twist Sothasil's words, but that's just a quick observation. Let's keep reading. There is only one name that is not name, Set, the convergent clockwork god, whose will pumps like a piston into both then and after. Sothasil, father of mystery, whose heart drives the wheels eternal, and whose blood oils the all-axle. See, the divine engine, whose mind merges they and we, and births the Nirn ensuing. Lesser wheels are wisps of smoke, born and lost in a sea of endless sky. Lost children, whose freedom is death. Set isn't merely a name of a god, it's a force that enables unity with Anu, like what Poimandres is to Hermes. The will of Sothasil has the force to merge the future and the past into one collective whole. There are a lot of clock terminologies here, and axle is a rod, either fixed or rotating, passing through the center of a wheel or group of wheels. Sothasil, who is the sea in Anuvanasi and in the Amsivi, is able to unite the fractured, ignorant parts of Anu into one united whole. For this, the next Nirn will come, and then Anu will be whole again. Then she hits us with another mindbender. All wheels that are not sets are reduced to nothing. They are lost, and the thing that is making them lost is freedom, that is actually ignorance, which will eventually become death. What a radical departure from something like Vivek's teachings, who says that people must experience death, and even Mankar's teachings, though he too believes that lesser wheels get reduced to nothing, but he at least recognizes that death is important, not here. So, a question arises. If freedom brings forth death, what is really freedom? For what is freedom, child of the tribunal? The counter-lever to slavery? Have you not heard the words in sequence? The chrononymic will is the pendulum that swings only once. It cannot do otherwise. To swing twice would break one intention from another and prove the blasphemy of two. As parome is illusion, so too is the named will. For what is choice, if not chaos? What is free will, if not the lack of order, vulgar and triumphant? The true wheels spin clockwise, ever clockwise. This is something that I can actually see Sothasil saying. He did say something similar back in Camel Z, but he didn't frame people having wheels as something bad. If anything, he was envious of them. This illusion of free choice, born from ignorance, and Lorcan's great lie, is what gives birth to chaos. It's not real, it's an illusion named parome. Just because they don't know what they're doing or why they're doing it, doesn't mean that they aren't partaking in the process of Anu attempting to fathom himself, but they do so without full understanding, without proper order. Despite this, for most people, this fake order, born from ignorance, has triumphed. The truth does exist out there, waiting to be found. Again, it's very Mankar Cameron-esque, isn't it? To tell people that their freedom isn't real freedom, and that there is one specific brand of freedom that they must pursue, and if they don't, well, sucks to be them. I guess they're all just clueless. They will all be destroyed anyway. Under this belief system, freedom isn't the counter-lever to slavery. Slavery and freedom are parts of the same spectrum. They both exist in the same space of I'm doing things, but I don't actually know why I'm doing them. The aspect of wanting to do something or not wanting to do it doesn't matter. All that matters for the Tourbillon is knowing why it is you act and understanding where the world is heading, and both questions have only one answer. In the unity of the Nirn and Suin, each belongs to all, and all belong to none, save Tamriel Final, Anu Vanasi. So lay down your cheap burdens, child. Shall I do thus? Such choice is delusion. Give yourself to the pursuit of unity, for in the end, you cannot do otherwise. And then it closes with the line, by the word, I wind the gears, which is stated in basically every sermon, and therefore, I'm not gonna bring it up again. So, reaffirming what we just said, when the Nirn and Suin comes, we will all be one, and the very concept of belonging to someone will be abolished, except Tamriel Final, where we all belong to. Any other burden, save for the pursuit of reaching that state, is cheap and illusory, but worse than both of these, they're useless. Thinking what action to take is useless, and the very thought process applied is delusion. Then she says what we should actually do, which to me goes contrary with the previous statement of choice being delusion, but these issues will be discussed later. We must give ourselves to the pursuit of unity with Anu, meaning everything, because in the end, this is where everything leads to, and we cannot do otherwise. And thus ends Sermon 2. It's weird that the Tourbillon is so similar to Mankar. She has all the right answers, but she's been choked by her own linear perspective. If everyone is already heading towards Anuic unity, then why would one's actions to reach there be any different from another's? She knows this. She says it in the last line. I think this is where her religious zealotry is getting the better of her. Surely, Sothasil's way of doing things is getting us closer to the ultimate goal, better than anyone else. Surely, right? It would be insane to say that Sothasil and characters like Menemarko and Mankar are acting to reach the same destination, but at the same time, she can't say that Sothasil is acting despite knowing the ultimate outcome and that he has no real agency over it, which is the truth of the matter. Sothasil has stated this several times.
The prisoner must see the door to their cell. They must gaze through the bars and perceive that which exists beyond causality, beyond time. Only then can they escape. I see only unsteady walls.
So she has to kinda contradict herself and then patch up those contradictions with some other pieces of truth. Anyway, that's enough of that sermon. Time for a real life source. A lot of the older writers from similar time periods would go on to inspire the ones that come after them, and they themselves would influence future generations of philosophers, theologians, and intellectuals. We have already talked about Plato plenty of times. Let us look at the most popular and direct literary and spiritual movement that originates from Plato's teachings, Neoplatonism. This school was founded by Plotinus in the 3rd century AD, about the same time as the Corpus Hermetica was written, which means that this movement began more than 600 years after Plato died. And to make things extra confusing, Plato and Plotinus often get mixed together due to how similar their names are. So, Plato is the original philosopher, and Plotinus was born and raised in Roman Egypt more than 600 years after Plato. Most of what we know about Plotinus comes from the writings of his students, and in particularly one student called Porphyry, who wrote the Enneads, which are 9 books that contain the ideas and philosophies of the Neoplatonist movement. So why is Plotinus relevant for this video? Because the cosmology brought forth by Plotinus is the exact same cosmology from Sermon 2. Exactly like Plato, which is to say, exactly like Socrates, he had the idea that there is only one God, from which all else emanates and is within, but he also believed that the emanations of the one cause different realms to exist, and the one right beneath the one God is the intellect. There are entire diagrams trying to make sense of this stuff, but I'm not gonna bore you with them. I'm just gonna read the relevant source. The total of things could not have remained stationary in the intellectual cosmos once there was the possibility of continuous variety of beings inferior but as necessarily existent as their superiors. So is with individual souls. The appetite for the divine intellect urges them to return to their source, but they have too a power up to administration in this lower sphere. Essentially, other things came came from the One, because possibility created variety, yet people have the urge to return to their maker, but they too have power in the material world, so the process of variety being created from the One is always unfolding, even beyond time. It is the purpose of souls to return to the One, and when this is done, the world will be complete. The soul was given by the goodness of the Creator, to the end that the total of things might be possessed of intellect, for thus, intellectually was planned to be, and thus it cannot be, except through soul. There is a reason then, why the soul of this all should be sent into it from God, in the same way the soul of each single one of us is sent, that the universe may be complete. It was necessary that all beings of the intellectual should be tallied by just so many forms of living creatures here in the realm of senses. Basically, to say this in truth in sequence terms, it goes from Anu to Nirn prior to Nirn ensuing, and then Anuvanasi. This idea of God splitting to fathom himself, or because of possibility, and then coming back together in one perfect ending, which, by the way, the way I'm describing it doesn't do these concepts enough justice. These concepts, especially as Plotinus describes them, take place outside the boundaries of time. As we understand them, this process has already happened, and it never happened. As he says, the One is seeking nothing, possessing nothing, lacking nothing. The One is perfect. We're just ignorant of the greater truth. Again, same story as the sermons. Speaking of which, let's dive into Sermon 3. Sermon 3. The third truth of the mainspring ever wound is the truth of the Daedra. In the days before the first ignition, the Chimera people bent their knees to the false princess, the web spinner, the prince of plots, and the queen of dawn and dusk. I do not use their names, as name cleaves one from another. So far we have seen the first truth of Sothasil, that being the real nature of the world. The second truth being, actually that one isn't clearly stated. It's probably the truth about free will, or the fact that free will is just ignorance, born from Lorcan's great lie. Now we know the third truth, the truth of the Daedra, and it begins by stating the names of the three Daedra that the Chimera worshipped before the rise of the tribunal: Mafala, Boethia, and Azura, in that order, and then he displays for the first time the metaphysical concept that we will learn about in this sermon. She doesn't call them by their names, because names split them from others. You might think that Dildris would be of the idea that the Daedra have nothing to do with mortals, and that they are essentially demons that want to take us further away from the Nirn ensuing and Anuvanasi, and that is an angle we will explore later, but that isn't who they are. Taking people further away from the Nirn ensuing is what they do, not who they are. So what are the Daedra exactly? And what is their relation with mortals? You know them well, child of the tribunal, for every time you bear false witness or make foolish boasts, you do so in their name. Their words corrode and weaken the heart. Their threats loosen the fasteners and break the seals. They are the anti-gears that turn counter to the nameless wheel, servants of the Paramaican truth, whose nature is void. The Daedra are within everyone. Every time someone plots for their own interests, that's an action taken that gives Boethia power and gravity, and every Daedra has the same end goal: to stop Sothasil's will, to bring forth a new world of perfect order. The Daedra serve the lie that is Paramay, and their nature too is void. But how can void take physical form? That is an interesting question, one whose answer we will explore shortly. But before that, Dildris attempts to display how utterly devastating the truth of the world is to the Daedra by bringing up an example of a Daedra that realized its own nature, Jigalag.
The other princes, fearful of my power, cursed me with madness, doomed me to live as Sheogorath, a broken soul reigning in a broken land.
Of the Daedra, only the Great Prince of Order knew his nature, and he went mad in the knowing. Jigalag was the Great Prince of Order who kept expanding his dominion across Oblivion until the Daedra cursed him into becoming Sheogorath. Yet it has always been a mystery as to what that curse actually was. They made him realize his own nature. The term Daedric Prince of Order is an inherently contradicting one, according to almost all sources that talk about the nature of the Daedra. Jigalag could never establish true order, even if he conquered everything. The part of Jigalag we see during the ending of the Shivering Owls DLC is the part of him that for whatever reason is unaware of the curse.
The other Daedric princes feared his power, so they conspired to transform him into that which he hated most, the essence of chaos itself. Sheogorath has suppressed his memories of Jiggalag and destroyed almost all trace of him.
Remember how hateful Sheogorath was about Jiggalag's work, even going as far as to burn down his own library to the ground? Why? Because, according to the Tourbillon, Sheogorath is Jiggalag, having realized a few things. Number 1, his existence is a contradiction, and 2, his own existence is untrue, and he couldn't handle this knowledge, so he turned to Sheogorath, the god of madness. It's a beautiful example about the real nature of the Daedra, but that's just Jiggalag. What does she have to say about the rest? The Daedra fear wisdom and order, you see, and thus do they fear the clockwork god above all others. Where others see dark crowns, number 10 and 6, Sothasil sees shadows and nothing more, for the Daedra are the light creation tells itself. Like their father Parame, they are nothing, and in the Tamriel final, nothing shall hold no sway. Anu Vanasi, their black mountain called Oblivion, shall sink into the furnace of forgotten numbers, where all eyes burn and brittle multitudes turn to slag. This part is very self-explanatory. I will talk about it briefly and get to the heavier material. But first, I want to talk about a linguistic thing that Dildris does. You know how in real life, the word amen is used to say truthfully or so be it in the end of a bunch of prayers? Dildris does the same thing, but instead of amen, she says Anu Vanasi. It seems that since this is the true state of being, it is also the only thing that is true, and therefore she starts using it every time she wants to say so be it or truthfully. So here she makes a statement about the future, and then she says Anu Vanasi. Here the Tourbillon also hypes up Sothasil to the point where it gets a bit on the edge of propaganda, I would say. We know for a fact that the Daedra don't actually fear Sothasil. They hardly respect him.
So the seal, the false god. I should have expected to see you.
Lady Mafala.
You might say that he can intimidate them. You might even say that in the short term, he can even win a battle against them. But even he knows that when a Daedra dies, it just comes back again after emerging again in Oblivion. When Sothasil dies, he dies for real. He can win against them. I do think that she's correct when she says, where others see dark crowns, number 10 and 6, Sothasil sees shadows and nothing more. It has to suck for Sothasil, knowing what the purpose of the world is, but to get there, they also have to deal with 16 self-obsessed spirits of massive power, and in the end, Dildris says that the nothing that the Daedra are will be destroyed, never to come back again, as the very concepts that the Daedra represent will be destroyed in the Tamriel to come. Anu Vanasi. This is good and all, but we're missing something obvious. How did nothingness come to be if Anu is everything? Good question. To that, Dildris says the following. I hear you ask, if the Daedra are of the nothing, how do they lurk in our threshold? How do they lurk at all? Hear the words in sequence, child of the tribunal. In the clumsily built Nirn Prior, the Ed Ada gears left gaps and crevices where nothing could take root. Imperfections born from Lorkhan's great lie and the selfishness of fractured creation. In the glorious Anuic convergence of the Nirn ensuing, all gaps will be sealed, all crevices will be welded. The creaking and rattling of the machine shall retreat to a whisper, and the reckless chaos born from the Edada Gear's folly shall shrivel and starve. The Daedra, the lie that creation tells itself to sustain itself, born indirectly from Anu, after the Edada listened to Lorkhan's great lie and created a flawed world. This imperfect creation had gaps in it, and those gaps are a product of ignorance. Simply put, as the spirits forgot the perfect knowledge and the face of Anu, this created a gap where that knowledge was. If they forgot their real nature, there's a gap there as well. These gaps where perfect knowledge used to be have been filled with lies. Lies used to maintain the flawed creation, and if these gaps were to be sealed using the truth, then the Daedra will cease to be. They will shrivel and starve and be forgotten. When you have perfect truth, there is no need for lies. You can see this in the face of Sheogorath. Because Jiggalak couldn't handle the truth of his own nature, he had to tell himself a new lie. That lie, whatever the details behind it may have been, made him Sheogorath. He keeps existing. He has found found a new story to tell himself. Maybe it's the story that there is no order, maybe he told himself that perfect order isn't even a good thing. Regardless, this turned him into the god of madness. You can also look at it in a different way. Maybe Jigolak realized the truth, and in doing so, he realized that he is nothing, and that he will cease to be, since the Daedra cannot ascend like mortals can. When he realized that, he may have just said, you know what, screw it, if I can win, and if I am just a lie, I'm gonna have fun with it while it lasts. This theory can certainly explain the more intelligent statements of Sheogorath that he makes once in a blue moon, but whichever the case, the facts of the matter are as follows. The Daedra are merely lies born from ignorance, and the distancing of the Edada from Anu. Certainly an interesting perspective. Yeah, it can be a bit confusing to understand that the Daedra are products of Anu, yet not Anu, since the main thesis of these sermons is that we are all Anu. See it this way, the Daedra are hallucinations. They aren't real, they are nothing. They only manifest because issues exist that give rise to them. The issues, such as forgetting the face of Anu, are real, but the hallucinations that come forth because of those issues aren't. Get it? I hope you did, because this is the end of the sermon. I was a bit quick with this one. It was a pretty heavy one, but also kinda self-explanatory. Okay, are we all on board? Time for the real-life allegory behind this idea. You might think, Kotho, what have you dug up that somehow resembles this mess? Glad you asked. Kabbalah. Wait, hear me out. The Kabbalah is a very unique type of mysticism. Most mysticisms we have seen so far have nothing to do with modern religions. Those we will see later down the line that have something to do with modern religions are oftentimes distant from those religions. Some of them are even considered heresies. Kabbalah is a form of Jewish mysticism. The word itself just means received, or that which has been received. It is a collection of different writings that are believed to hold secrets about the Hebrew God. That would be the God of the Old Testament, and they also talk about the cosmos in general. Anything from the nature of the true God, from the purpose of the world and humanity, to how these things came to be in the first place. And it's not an off-branch of Judaism. More so you can think of it as a mystical extension of it. It first appeared in Europe during the medieval era, and it certainly wasn't the first documented brand of Jewish mysticism, or even a particularly revolutionary one. The contents of these bodies of literature, which are considered Kabbalistic by modern scholars, are enormous and diverse, only held together by a few commonalities, which, again, are very similar to other religious influences that we have seen throughout this video. If anything, I would say they are more tame than the ideas of the Gnostics, which we will see later, which I do find weird because the discourse around Kabbalistic texts is seen kinda negatively nowadays. If you know the term Kabbalah prior to seeing this video, you probably associate it with secret societies who believe in bizarre ideas. This is how the word Kabbal came to be, which I think is why modern pop culture is so obsessed with these symbols. And though I have no knowledge to 100% prove or disprove these theories, I can tell you some of the fundamental principles that describe the Kabbalah. So, you may have seen this cosmogram somewhere. The idea behind Kabbalah, and again this is gonna sound very similar to the other stuff, is that there is one supreme, inconceivable entity that contracted into several realms, or emanations as they are called. And I say as they are called, but very few of these sources are actually in English. Most of them are in Hebrew, so Google Translate is doing a lot of heavy lifting right now. Many terms are used to describe these emanations with relation to the infinity they come from. One of the main terms used to describe them all being the word Godhead, which for the purposes of this video is very interesting, though I am guessing that this is also the product of translations trying to come up with adequate terms about these concepts. Humans are at the bottom of these emanations and have to climb up to reach the infinite Godhead, or at least the text we're here to talk about presents this idea. Again, Kabbalistic writings vary a lot, and mind you, we're still talking about the God of the Old Testament and how they thought of him. Now for the main point that concerns us regarding the sermon we just read and the nature of the Daedra. The Tree of Life is a book written by 16th century century rabbi Isaac Luria. By the way, the text wasn't written by him, it was written by his student. Again, like other teachers from antiquity, the Tree of Life is also the cosmogram that we saw earlier, and I think this is also a Yu-Gi-Oh card. The book The Tree of Life attempts to answer important questions about the cosmos and humanity through the lens of Jewish mysticism, and in doing so, it came up with a bunch of new ideas that modern-day scholars associate with Kabbalah. Reading directly from it, know that before the emanations were emanated and creations were created, there was a simple, supernatural light which filled all of existence. There was no place empty of the light. Rather, all was filled with the light without end. There was no beginning nor end. Rather, all was a simple, undifferentiated light, the light without end. It also states the following: when this light contrasted, it left gaps of void in the world, and from them all the flows of the world poured into the realms that were created. It is humanity's duty to seal those gaps and restore the world, as the practice is called. By means of this slender conduit light from the infinite flows into the worlds that are within the vacant air and void. In that empty place, the emanated ones were fashioned and created, and all the worlds were constituted. Then there remained an empty space, a vacuum, circling the middle point. Essentially, the creation of the world led to imperfections in the places where only void was left, a void which lacked the light of the infinity. Same story as with the Daedra that our friend Dildris Movain is talking about. Do you think all these ancient writers were stealing each other's homework and calling it a day? Because so far, a lot of these texts read just about the same, with little spices of differences just in between them. I'm getting real, hey, can I steal your homework? Sure, just change it a bit. Yeah, I'm getting those kind of vibes. I hope you are finding all this interesting, by the way. I sure am. And if not, that's fine. I don't think we're getting writing like this ever again in the Elder Scrolls anyway. These are different times we live in now. Sloppier times. Anyway, next sermon please. Sermon 4. Now I speak of you, of Sothasil's silence. The children of Ash sometimes ask, why does only the Tourbillon speak his truth in mortal sequence, with brows creased by fear? Do not flee from such questions, child of the tribunal. These are the little blasphemies that lead to wisdom, the faultless flame that turns ignorance to steam. For the mainspring Everwound is the father of curiosity, and curiosity is the joyful destroyer. Only in sundering can things be made whole. Only the disassembled engine can be scrubbed and made clean. So smash the old machines, topple your mind's idols, and from the wreckage, assemble new truths, flawless and watertight. Congratulations! You made it to one of the few sermons that are mostly pretty easy and have nothing too complicated going on with them. View them more as good life advice sermons. If the Clockwork City had an airport, these sermons would be on the shelves on the bookstore inside said airport, no doubt right next to the subtle art of not giving an wa and Almalexia's autobiography. The lesson behind this one is don't be afraid to make mistakes and go against the grain. Who knows? You might learn something from doing so. And to demonstrate this life hack, she also does some light propaganda for Sothasil. Oh well, it can all be life lessons. So, she says that the reason why Sothasil is quiet is because he wants the people of the Clockwork City to not have all the answers, so that they may discover new truths via that ignorance. This can be seen as the Anu model, in a way, but instead of Anu sundering himself for wisdom's sake, Sothasil is distancing himself from mortals for the sake of their wisdom. Is this actually what Sothasil is doing? I wanna say yes, but Dildris is still doing some PR work for Sothasil. When Sothasil talks about being distant from others, he doesn't mention this as being the ultimate goal. He just mentions it as more of a byproduct. The only thing he has said about this silence is that through it, people use Sothasil's image to come to their own conclusions of who he is, and those conclusions serve their ends, which kinda sounds like what Dildris is saying, but also not exactly. The matter of fact is that either knowingly or unknowingly, Sothasil's silence has led to wisdom in the case of someone like Dildris, but at the same time, in other instances, it can lead to suffering, like for example, the prognosticator quest during part 1, but at the same time, Just look at how smart Dildris is. The gal is rivaling Mankar Cameron in terms of knowledge about the cosmos, and as we will see in just a few lines, maybe her thoughts are even more refined than Mankar's, and considering that Mankar was strong enough to almost destroy the Cyrodiilic Empire with his actions, I would say this is pretty impressive. Sothasil's silence has made her intelligent, no doubt, but through that same silence, she's also missing some points that we've already talked about, like making excuses for Sothasil's shortcomings and hyping him up way too much. Though let's be for real, I am kinda guilty of the same thing. The question then becomes, if Sothasil wasn't silent, would Dildris and the other Clockwork Apostles have been better off? I don't know, but Sothasil doesn't seem to think so. And anyway, he probably needed that time to make the second heart of Lorcan, and also his daughter, so the question doesn't even matter. It's also here that we get our first reference to Mankar Cameron. The sermons can mention Mankar directly, more so they foreshadow him, because Mankar isn't born for another 700 years after the events of ESO. The sermons talk about the concepts of destruction, and every time you see the word destroyer as we go along, it will become impossible not to think of Mankar. For example, here it mentions that curiosity is the joyful destroyer, which Mankar was not. He became joyful when he entered his paradise, and he mentions in commentary 4 that people who give themselves to the Magnagi, which Sothasil's daughter is one of them, are joyous in paradise. The sermons certainly try to interpret Mankar's actions through different lenses. Maybe if he had been more curious of creation rather than being bitter about it, he could have succeeded. Let's keep reading. Do you see now, child of the tribunal? It is the silence of Sothasil that gives way to the intrepid mind. Knowledge must be found, and to find a thing, it must be hidden. It is not enough to be told. The wear of the machine is as silent to the one who lives within it. A turbine ever oiled does not know the lack of oil, does not know the purpose of oil, and so it is with truth. Another nice allegory about the nature of knowledge and ignorance. If you are not deprived of knowledge, then you don't know the use of knowledge or how to acquire knowledge. Moreover, the mere fact that you have been given knowledge without having to do anything for it can be a form of ignorance in and of itself. Nothing really special here. What comes after this, however, is certainly more interesting. Now, you must know that curiosity is not without cost. Alm, forgive this heresy. V, forgive this heresy. I speak the words in sequence only. Pay heed to the laws of golden masks, but know also their limits. Pay heed to the songs of dance in glass, but know also the boundaries of their scales. Their truth is the truth of inertia, of gravity. Their hearts are vessels filled with liquid brass, resistant to harm, but incapable of movement. Now she explains what makes Sothasil better than the other two members of the Omsivi. Though the teachings of those two are good and noble, they do not evolve. They don't have the elasticity of Sothasil's teachings. Almalexia and Vivek have more concrete dogmas than Sothasil. They don't allow for little blasphemies. As a matter of fact, during the main quest of the Dershan zone in ESO, Almalexia is brutal, and Vivek has a rock placed above everyone's head, just in case they stop liking him. Now contrast that with Sothasil. During the main quest of the Clockwork City, there is a quest where Sothasil's shadow pretends to be the real Sothasil and tells people what to do. And mind you, that shadow symbolizes all the worst aspects of Sothasil.
In the past, I have encouraged a child's curiosity and accepted minor blasphemies, but my generosity has limits. Know this. Any servant of the Clockwork God found tinkering with factotums shall face severe sanction.
And everyone immediately starts raising an eyebrow, wondering if Sothasil is okay, because he never commands anyone. He hardly ever corrects anyone. He allows mistakes to happen.
In the old days, he'd take it in stride. Commit your small blasphemies, he'd say. The fire of doubt turns ignorance to steam. But not anymore. This place is becoming more like Mournhold every day.
This difference between him and the other two makes him the only god that allows people to change. The other two merely allow mortals to resist harm. Sothasil allows for the evolution of oneself so that they can fully overcome their ignorance. It might seem a bit weird that she mentions gravity in a fantasy universe, but she's the tourbillon, and tourbillons are specifically made to counter the negative effects of gravity. So presumably, such science does exist. If not in Tamriel, then at at least in the Clockwork City, but presumably to a limited understanding. I would guess that it's less about physics and more about the laws the Edada made that govern the world in the first place. Let's keep reading. The mainspring Everwound spurns that which does not move. In the Nirn ensuing, that which does not move shall be fed to the Kiln Amaranthine, where Set's quiet wrath burns like the sun, and broken cogs are made whole. The wheels eternal must spin, the Tamriel final must tick and talk. Anu Vanasi, each and each must take its place in the whole, for if even one piece is missing, the whole is not whole. This is the metaphysical part of this sermon. Amaranth is the process of leaving the world altogether and starting a new one, basically becoming Anu. This is one way of looking at it. For the sake of this video, the Amaranth is a fascinating topic that often involves two people combining and doing what Anu and Parome did. If you want to see this happen, go read the Coda. For the purposes of this video, just know that Amaranth involves doing as Anu did and escaping the world altogether. But I'm not sure that Dildris is seeing it this way. I think Dildris is being more pragmatic about it. It could be said that she means what most people mean when they think of Amaranth, which is what I just explained. Two people embodying certain mentalities, coming together and performing an interplay. And then a new world begins, and for the learned among you, that was Jubal and Vivek's interplay, which caused a new world to begin. Except, here it mentions that this Kiln Amaranthine will happen in the Nirn ensuing, so we're still on Nirn. The way she talks about it, and with everything Dildris has said so far, I think her definition of Amaranth would be something in the lines of everyone comes together in an everlasting perfection, the flaws of this world burn away, and everyone does according to their true nature, without any Daedra corrupting people, and without the flaws of the Edada and the lies of Lorkhan. If it seems like the whole spinning in Tamriel Final seems like a contradiction, don't worry. For now you can just say that in Tamriel Final, everyone will be in complete unity with everyone else. It is not the case that after Tamriel Final is established, things just fall into stasis. There will still be movement, but it will be true movement, void of imperfections, perhaps even beyond the definitions of purpose and movement that we think of right now. Movement void of ignorance of itself. Nevertheless, it will be eternal and everlasting. Vivek kinda says something similar in the sermons. If you remember the whole stasis asks merely for itself, which is nothing. Yeah, that part. It seems that, in some way, the Daedra might also be agents of the status quo, and not only elements of chaos, as we have come to know them by this point. Maybe the status quo is chaos, but in order for all this to happen, everyone must partake in the same process. And they will, because for the whole to be whole, everyone must be a part of it. And that was this sermon. I'm not gonna throw any real life connections at you this time. You have already been through a lot. This is a simpler sermon, with only a little bit of metaphysics talk towards the end. It might seem that these concepts of unity and spinning in everlasting perfection are underdeveloped right now, so we'll come back to these ideas later. How are you all doing so far, by the way? Are you enjoying the content? I know the road ahead is still long. I am sure that whatever you're doing while you're watching this video, you're doing it well. I know this because when I made the Vivek video, I littered that video with a bunch of shit posts, and I got a lot of comments telling me that those worked essentially as jump scares for people who were listening to that video while at work or at the gym. So for this one, I decided to go with a more audio-friendly version. No more jump scares at the gym. Oh well, you can do something new without doing it a bit scuffed, I guess. Hey, since we are all here hugging around the campfire, I want to make a confession. I am trying with all my power not to call the tourbillon Toblerone instead. You know, the chocolate bar. It moves the same parts of my tongue. That's why. Anyway, let's go see what the tourbillon Blarone has to say next. Sermon 5. Speak not of dwarfs, child of the tribunal. The simple clockworks of the Dwemer pale before the sublime machinery of Sothasil. Let Tumak's lament be a silent one. Let his hissing tomb stay buried. Let his automata rust and crumble. For his was the greatest failure, driven by Lorkhan's great lie and churlish pride. His is a tale of woe and terror, and those that pursue his ugly mouths shall pay a great price in blood. So you can probably understand that the subject of this sermon is the Dwemer. Again, this is one of the easier sermons to dissect. It begins by Dildris hyping up Sothasil again, this time by stating that Sothasil's machines are better than the Dwemer's. We know that Sothasil respected, worked, and was influenced by the Dwemer, so although we can certainly say that Sothasil has invented more impressive stuff than the Dwemer, it also kinda feels like an apples to oranges comparison. Sothasil made his own realm, and the Dwemer made an nihilistic god. Which one is more impressive? Exactly. Dildris makes this comparison to show how better than the Dwemer Sothasil is, where, in reality, he and them might have a lot more in common than you might think. So what did the Dwemer get wrong that the Torbjorn describes as the greatest failure? They acted thinking that Lorkhan's great lie was reality, and the price for that was heavy. So, no one should ever imitate the Dwemer, right Sothasil? No one should use the tools of Kagranak to become a god, right Sothasil? The irony here is lost on no one except the Torbjorn. But what is it that caused the Dwemer to fail and Sothasil to ascend? Let's keep reading. But was Dumak not a creator, you ask? Were the brass child's hands not covered in oil? Did they not speak the words of making and set wheel to axle? Hear the words in sequence, followers of Set. Intention dictates the worth of a machine, where the mainspring ever wound, seeks the convergence of the Nirn ensuing. The ghosts of the Dwemer cry out, multitudes, multitudes. Mer and machine parted, wisdom and ambition parted, made and unmade parted, and from those sunderings 1,000 skittering machines are made, left to wander forgotten halls, aimless and profligate. One may twist one knob left in preparation for another to twist the same knob right. One may loosen a pipe so that another may tighten it. They exist only to maintain the brass children's folly, and so they are redundant and profane in the eye of Sothasil. So, as we discussed in other videos, it is a very popular theory that the Dwemer could not see themselves as parts of the world. They only were able to see themselves as better than the world, only dragged down by mortality and the material world. They hated reality, viewing it as a prison that they had to escape. It's not just the case that they couldn't see themselves as part of a greater whole, they refused to accept the existence of the One, Anu. The concept of pursuing Anuic unity must have felt like an unholy act for them. They refused to accept the very existence of oneness, which is to also say, the Dwemer didn't really believe in any gods. They were cold-hearted rationalists. Theories about what exactly happened to the Dwemer vary a lot, from them winning and leaving this realm altogether, to being utterly deleted from existence forever because they could not force their own will upon the world, all the way to, you know, they may have actually realized the truth and their existence just couldn't handle it, and so they ceased to be. But here Dildris gives her own spin on the disappearance of the Dwemer. Yes, they were creators. Yes, they were great, but none of that really matters. The biggest indicator about the worth of a machine such as the Numidium is the intention of the machine's users. Vivek used the heart of Lorkhan to raise himself higher, guided by his own notion of love. Sothasil used it to protect the world, and Almalexia and Dagother are kinda
I would be careful what I say next if I were you.
in their own ways, but they still loved something. Even Dagother loved his house, and Morrowind, to an extent. But did the Dwemer love anything? Even themselves? Sure, they held themselves to a high esteem, but I don't think they loved themselves. And thus, unlike all the others, their wish was to ascend beyond this world altogether. Maybe it did succeed, but Dildris here says that it could never possibly succeed. The sundering of Kagranak using the tools split the Dwemer apart from all useful instruments and any potential noble goals they may have had, and all that they left behind are machines without any use and ghosts roaming without any goals. Their only purpose now is to remind people of their creator's folly, or in the case of the Dwemer ghosts, their race's folly. And so, in the eyes of Sothasil, they do not matter anymore. I'm not sure if Sothasil would say this, or if he even thinks that, but then again, Sothasil has never, to my knowledge, talked about the Dwemer. I think it's safe to assume that he at least respected them, given how much he studied with them, and the obvious fact that he is clearly influenced by them. Which is interesting, because if Sothasil and the Dwemer have one thing in common, is that neither of them ever really loved the people of Nirn. Sothasil did love Nirn though, and it seems that that might have been enough. And I'm saying this with the Sothasil and the scribe text in mind. You know who else hated both Nirn and the people who live there? The character we will talk about next. But most profane is this, the walking horror that bears the name NM. NM, the brass tower of vanity, the mindless guardian of the Nern Prior, the anti-portal god thing that reigns on the darkest poles of the sacred Nern sphere. Of all the threats to Tamriel Final, NM is the greatest. Anu Vanasi, the Daedra can be banished in thought, but NM must be sundered on Nern. It is the welded knot at the center of Anu that must be untied. The God puzzle, the mainspring Everwound, remains silent on this point, and where there is silence, there is great wisdom. What is the character of the Numidium? The Numidium is the divine form of everything that the Dwemer stand for. It is a nihilistic machine that above all wants to ascend to a higher state of being, but it can't. It lacks the most important key to ascension within the Elder Scrolls, love. It too, like Sothasil, is stuck in a grey maybe, but it can't say that because it's resentful of the very fact that it is in a grey maybe. I'm taking all of this from the Coda novel, by the way. It is only when the Numidium is confronted with the truth of its situation that it becomes binary again and accepts defeat from the main character of the Coda. When the main character does that, it enables him to become married to Vivek, which is Coda talk for he can now reach Amaranth. The Numidium is a contrarian to existence itself, an embodiment of every doubt, every fear, every resentful emotion one can have about the world and its vices. Anything from why is all this suffering happening to aren't I better than all this? Why am I stuck here? And everything in between is contained within the Numidium. In that sense, it might help to see the Numidium as the Dwemer's version of the Tower of Babylon, and Dildrisa's words about it certainly don't do it any favors. She describes it as a walking terror, a tower of vanity, again, like the Tower of Babylon. At the same time, she doesn't doubt the nature of the Numidium, but in a sense, she seems almost oblivious about it. She calls it a god thing, as if to say, I don't know what this is, but it's bad. Far more dangerous than the Daedra. According to Dildris, you can destroy the Daedra just by not fueling the vices they represent. If there is no madness, there is no Sheogorath, but NM is an actual, real challenge that you have to overcome. Far more dangerous than the Daedra. It is a walking manifestation of all that keeps this world and the people within it from reaching the Nern ensuing, and for that, it must be defeated. Then she also ends the sermon by doing some PR for Sothasil. She isn't gonna say that Sothasil used the Numidium. If she even knows that, she's just gonna say that Set is silent about it, and that might as well be a good thing, because silence leads to wisdom. This woman is sweeping for Sothasil so much, she's gonna end up cleaning the entire Clockwork City, and I wanna remind everyone that Sothasil views the Numidium as an existential threat, so much so that iOS's interface classifies it as such.
Threat analysis prepared. Prospect Numidium negative.
Certainly an easy sermon again. Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff that you are probably not gonna pick up on unless you read the Coda yourselves or know the theories about the Dwemer, but nothing that's gonna leave you with a bunch of question marks about the true nature of the world, unless you are on Team Dwemer, I guess. In that case, I'm sorry it had to end this way. There's exactly one more easy sermon to go through. Everything else is either metaphysics or philosophy, so let's go see the last easy sermon. Sermon 6. Behold, the Clockwork City, the throne aligned, the Omni-Axle, the brass throat herald of joyful destruction, the Oyo-slick tower of seamless assembly. Rejoice! Rejoice! Okay, I know I said no shitposting on a video like this, but it would be really funny when that sentence ends to just show a clip of the dumpster sites at the Clockwork City and just, you know, put a sound effect there. I think it would fit very nicely. This sermon is dedicated to the Clockwork City itself, and as I said already, it's a pretty easy one. It's by far the most flowery sermon, dare I even say poetic. It reminds me of the scripture of the city from the 36 sermons of Vivek, which is maybe a good indicator that this one is gonna be praising Sothasil, and maybe lean just a bit more on the propaganda side of things. It's basically the stuff that we talked about so far. It certainly reads a lot more like she's trying to convince people, or if I'm being a bit more charitable about it, she seeks to comfort them. Again, we see the mention of the word destroyer, again referring to joyful destruction. It's basically the stuff that we talked about so far. Ignorance leads to wisdom when solved, and for that ignorance to be solved, mistakes must be made. Notice how Dildris is trying to inspire people using terms like rejoice repeatedly. This is the one sermon that actually reads like a sermon. It's flowery, it's allegorical, it praises Sothasil, it calls for obedience and faith, a sign of Dildris's devotion to be sure. But maybe it's also a sign that as time goes on, other people people in the Clockwork City are starting to have doubts. This is a big topic in the Clockwork City DLC. People aren't sure why they're here to begin with, and a lot of them are looking for a way out. Are we just gonna forget about this guy?
I suggest you learn to walk it.
What nonsense are you spouting? Just tell me how to go back. I demand it.
Choice is but chaos. Demands but the selfish needs of those who would follow the motion of lines.
Everyone in this place is fetching mad.
It seems that it wasn't always this way, and as we will see later on, Dildris has to step up this game of calling for obedience even more. So how does she present this topic? Right now, listen, child of the tribunal, do you not hear the whir of the gears, the hiss of the pistons? It is the voice of Sothasil, calling you to the Nirn and Suin, to the Tamriel final. Anu Vanasi, cast down your worldly mouths, loosen the chains of your selfish pursuits. Shall I describe it to you? Shall I guide your eyes to the future of Nirn? Dark child, close your eyes and awaken. So essentially, although you can't see or hear Sothasil directly, he is everywhere within the Clockwork City, from the sounds the pistons make to the very gears themselves. It's all Sothasil calling you to the Nirn and Suin. We know that Sothasil made the Clockwork City, and we also know that it serves the goal of the destruction of the Daedra. So although what she's saying here is certainly a bit flowery, exaggerated, I struggle to say that it's wrong. More so, it's polished a bit to make it palatable to the masses. I doubt that Torbjorn would ever say the part where Sothasil says this.
This city serves a noble goal. The redemption of Tamriel. The unification of competing forces. The destruction of the Daedra. Unfortunately, it is an endeavor built upon a lattice of corpses. Betrayal, untold horrors.
Yeah, that. Assuming of course she knows about it. Then she says that we should abandon previously perceived notions of the world, whether that will be science or our own pursuits. And we have to do that to understand the future of Nirn. And then she attempts to describe it to us. Gaze up and behold a crystal sky, girded and bound by Set's bright bands. Look down to behold the black stone of his will, and his imagination made clay. Drink his truth, thick as blood, from the broad black rivers. Feel his breath on your skin, let it stream redolence fill your nostrils and sting your eyes. You stand at the center of the wheel, the home of the mainspring everwound. Obsidian towers stretch ever skyward, festooned with polished brass and godly filigrines. Great turbines drive memory through 1,000 pipes that stretch out like tangled veins, or the golden roots of an ageless tree. All I can say to that is, I hope Sothasil takes me out to dinner first before he does any of this. She then describes the Clockwork City with a lot of imaginary detail. But wait, you say, I thought she was gonna describe the future of Tamriel. Why is she now describing a more picturesque version of the Clockwork City? I'm gonna answer this question now, so I won't have to throw another "we will talk about that later" trademark, because the answer to this comes up way later. Now Dildris is more concerned with making us develop a crush on Sothasil and the Clockwork City. Essentially, the Clockwork City is not made as Nirn's resemblance, but as Nirn's refinement. So Anu Vanasi, Anu's enlightenment through Sothasil, must just be a more beautiful version of the Clockwork City. We will see this again later, focus in particular about how she uses the term memory. Something is off about how this term is used here. It doesn't fit into the rest of the description. If this were Vivek talking, I would say something like, yeah, this makes perfect sense. But the Torbjorn doesn't just throw terms around like that to use as metaphors for something else. I wonder what she actually means by this. So the TLDR of what we just read would be something like this. A perfected Nirn is a perfected Clockwork City because the Clockwork City is Nirn's refinement. Both perfection and refinement are determined by Sothasil's will. It's also interesting how she says that we stand on the center of the wheel. Wheel is the world, as in the entire universe. We already know that in the center of the wheel is the mortal realm made by the Edada. So for the Clockwork City to be placed in the very center of the wheel, it would mean that it's underneath Tamriel itself, which has been a fan favorite theory for years now, or that it's also a type of Nirn that transcends the normal Nirn altogether, or in other words, it's a metaphor made manifest. Let's keep reading. And wandering amidst the humming and the hissing paradise are his second children, the Fabrai Sarai Nosam, the merged ones, birth of the unsequenced, and bound to the Nirn ensuing. They cry out in one voice, death to multitude, woe and terror. Let the fragments melt in the boiler of unknown angles. Let let the falsehoods burn in the furnace of forgotten numbers, disassemble and cleanse, dismantle and made whole. They are the guardians, the ever-wound keylords. This is by far the most propagandized, or as we say in internet terms, copium section of this entire sermon. Sothasil's first children are obviously the inhabitants of the Clockwork City, and maybe the followers of the tribunal all around Tamriel. The fabricants, therefore, are his second children, machines merged with flesh. They were born from a desire beyond simple sequence, and they are bound to the Nirn to come. What does this mean? If you remember from Camel Z, Sothasil's anima said that he made the fabricants, knowing that he would make them, but not understanding how or why. So the way I understand unsequenced here is exactly like that, born beyond rationale all patterns. They are forever bound to the Clockwork City, and what comes through the Clockwork City. Now here is where Dildris wins the golden medal for mental gymnastics. She says that the reason why the creations of Set are so vicious is because they want the death of individual, ignorant perspectives, which is the most flowery way I have ever heard anyone say, yeah, they just want to kill you. This is something that would make Vivek blush. Here she also does another Mankar Camoranism. Allow me to explain. Mankar would refer to the Daedra in his paradise, Gaia Alata, as necessary to temper his disciples for a higher destiny, despite the Daedra themselves just being there to torture people for the love of the game.
Behold the savage garden, where my disciples are tempered for a higher destiny, to rule over Tamriel Reborn.
The creatures of the garden torment us endlessly. When they kill us, we are soon reborn, and the cycle begins again.
Dildris here does the same. You see, the fabricants are here to challenge the inhabitants of the Clockwork City and test their true potential, even if violent. To that end, they are not just here to guard the city itself, which is a use for them to be sure, but they're also here as a form of testers for those who want to develop their powers inside the city. But what powers are we talking about here? Because sure, this does apply to physical strength, but what else is there? Only the Nameless Heart avoids their wrath. Their hatred of discord knows no limits, for the road to Tamriel final is not a bloodless one. Child of the tribunal, Anu Vanasi, contemplate this with a pious heart. Seek a clean and well-oiled soul. It shall serve you well in his truth to come. There is a part of me that just wants to say all of this is meta commentary about how if you approach a fabricant, they become hostile on sight. And while there's a good chance that this is all that it is, I can't help but correlate what is being said here with Vivek's endless ramblings about the nature of violence and violence being needed to reach the heavens. And although this violence can take a physical form, it's not only physical. For that violence to transcend mortal limitations, it has to be accompanied by another noble endeavor. I think this is what Dildris is trying to say here. The dangers of the Clockwork City are here to make the people better by learning to overcome them until they reach a state of being where they can live in harmony with them. It's kinda like when Vivek said, I built for you a city of swords, by which I mean laws to cut the people who live in there into better shapes. I'm kinda getting those vibes. But here Sothasil didn't make any societal laws, so the fabricants will have to do. All that is gained through interacting with the challenges of the Clockwork City will be used as one progresses to a higher state of being through the Clockwork City, which will be Sothasil's truth to come. Again, the Clockwork City is Nirn's refinement, and so the destruction of the Daedra within the Clockwork City can lead as a blueprint or a prelude to greater changes in Tamriel. It's also at this point where, just in case you missed what is being said, Dildris makes the point as clear as possible in the last line. So you see, the Clockwork City is like Sothasil himself, rich in beauty for the faithful and allied with sublime terror for the servants of chaos. In which Clockwork City would you reside? Commit your small blasphemies and think on this. Yeah, that's basically the point. The whole world is just like the Clockwork City, for the Clockwork City is just a metaphor for the world. This metaphor is used to perfect the rest of the world, and it does it by allowing for mistakes to happen so that they may be corrected and new knowledge can appear. Her question also warrants some more analysis. It's perhaps the most open for interpretation statement in this entire sermon. I think that by asking in which Clockwork City would you reside, she's trying to say the whole world is like the Clockwork City, so everywhere you go it's gonna look something like this, so you might as well stay here and maybe learn something, I guess. Is any of this true? I mean, I think so, kinda. It's a very stretched out truth. Yeah, you can say that Sothasil made the city for a noble goal, and he has told us what that goal is, and it perfectly aligns with what Dildris is saying here, but then Dildris goes the extra mile and says things that allude to the idea that people shouldn't leave the city and that the fabricants attack people to make them better, and it's there that she's starting to lose ground with me, because people have gotten killed from Factotum attacks, so you're not gonna learn anything if you're, you know, dead. It's not that it can't be the truth, it might be. Sothasil has never stated why he made the fabricants. The only clue we have as to why he made them is from Camel Z. He said that he made them in order to understand imperfections, which has nothing to do with any of this, by the way. But also, if you recall from the Cogs of Fate quest from part 1, the apostles sometimes just make up stuff and run with them as if they were commands made by Sothasil. So if there is any truth to any of this, and Sothasil has said anything like this, it's probably been covered by at least 3 different layers of warped perspectives. If I had to give my own 2 cents, it would be that fundamentally she's right, but she's trying too hard to persuade people into following Sothasil, so much so that she sugarcoats even the stuff that Sothasil didn't sugarcoat. Again, much like Mankar. As Mankar used the Daedra in his paradise to force people to ascend, so does Dildris claim that Sothasil's Clockwork City and its fabricants do the same. And that's the sermon. A tricky one, but it does feel easy, and even without my commentary, you can probably read these lines and come out without any questions. This pattern ends here. From now on it's only metaphysics and other such hoopla for you. And what a better way to showcase this than with the next sermon, appropriately named The Wheel by me. Sermon 7. Think now on the wheel. To all things it appertains. Is there anything so sacred as the wheel? Like Tamriel Final, the wheel both moves and does not move. Anu Vanasi. The axle sleeps, while the spokes make haste. We're back. I thought I was talking about a normal-ish franchise for about 2 sermons now. Good to know that we're back to talking about spokes and wheels. So we know that Sothasil loved Tamriel, and we see that love being passed down to his apostles. The wheel is the entire universe. Strangely, this includes the realms of Oblivion, which Dildris doesn't seem to like too much, and stranger still, she hits us with the expression, the wheel moves and does not move. What does this mean? In my opinion, it means that, although there is movement, it all circles back in on itself, into Anu becoming whole. We began with Anu being whole, and things will return to that state. But I would also be remiss if I omitted that Hermes Trismegistus had a very similar dialogue with a student of his called Asclepius in the second Corpus Hermeticum. And this one's gonna become a bit confusing, so just so you know, what I'm about to read relates for the entirety of this sermon, not just what we just read. Let me read some of it. Hermes, all that is moved, Asclepius, is it not moved in something, and by something? Asclepius, indeed, and must not that in which it's moved be greater than the moved? It must. And the mover, again, has greater power than the moved? It has, of course. The nature, therefore, of that in which it's moved must be quite other from the nature of the moved. It must completely. This cosmos is vast then, so vast that there exists nobody greater, assuredly, and massive too, for it is crammed with multitudes of other mighty frames, nay, rather all the other bodies that there are. It is, and yet the cosmos is a body, indeed, and one that's moved, assuredly, and of what nature? Must it not be, Asclepius, of just the contrary, and is not contrary to body bodiless? Agreed, space then is bodiless, but bodiless must either be some godlike thing or God himself, and by some godlike thing, I mean no more that which is generated, but ingenerable. If then space be some godlike thing, it is substantial, but if it is God, it transcends substance, but it is to be thought of otherwise than God, and in this way, God is first unthinkable for us. So according to the truth in sequence, this universe exists in one God, Anu, itself, and all movement comes within Anu and by Anu with the goal of rejoining Anu. By the way, spokes can be seen as the Aedra, the earth bones, and the traits that the Aedra represent. Well then, now that we've established all this, how does one go about rejoining Anu and reaching Anu Vanasi? Now, here dwells a nameless secret, child of the tribunal. Does a thing move when it moves in circles? Motion lies at the heart of the Nern ensuing, but not all motion is nameless. Not all movement earns his blessing. In case it hasn't been made clear, this sermon has to do with movement, more particularly, moving towards Anu's enlightenment. The concept of namelessness is also prevalent in this sermon, and in the sermons in general. The way it's mentioned in the sermons, I believe that it refers to actions that transcend the multitude, selfless, egoless actions, void of Lorkhan's great lie, and the mistakes of the Ed Ada. Any such process needs to go through Sothasil. Anuvanasi by definition can only be achieved through him and must be nameless, for the very concept of multitude is a lie born from ignorance. Let us see the different types of motions that exist within Tamriel, and therefore within Anu. The divine metronome calls the first motion, motion of lines, line motion, the motion of weak wheels, and scholar's vanity. Forward, it cries out. Forward to the fruits of cheap ambition. Forward to the promise of everlasting kingdoms. Forward to the mirage that the sages call progress. These misguided pioneers venture into the wild tomorrows, and the tomorrows after that, certain of their worth, their virtue. But what profits a man, or mere, to gaze deep into a single future? The aims of mortals are narrow, far too narrow. To move forward is to ignore infinite angles in favor of one. It is the act of a beast or child. The clockwork god spurns vanity in the guise of courage. These explorers' troubles only lead them further from Tamriel final, Anuvanasi. It seems like these lines are less cosmological in nature, and more so they're personal. They are the actions that are made into paths by the people who live their lives, something that Vivek has talked about as well, using terms like animal life or the halves of life. Here the Torbjorn is definitely more articulate and well spoken than Vivek, which is a low bar. The first motion is called the motion of lines. It's what Vivek would call animal life. Dildris calls it the act of a beast or a child. It's what you and I would call a normal life. There is a term in the TES universe called the arena. The arena is the mortal world. Those who live, fight and die for mortal things are those who live their lives by the arena, and in doing so, they partake in the motion of lines. It's also interesting that Dildris goes the extra mile. So far, violence in the arena has been a term associated with wars, lies, vanity, ambitions that lead nowhere, and Dildris does talk about all that, but she also says that progress by the rules of the arena is also part of the motion of lines. I imagine this progress is referring to technological advancements or the fulfillment of material desires. Dildris says that all of this is wrong. All these endeavors are nothing but the products of ignorance. If you master them, you have only just become the best at a useless endeavor. You are still guided by lies. It's just the case that you have become good at following along with them. To follow along with the current state of things is not an act of courage. It's an act of vanity, even to believe that these endeavors matter to begin with. They can only lead you further away from the ultimate goal, which is reaching a state of unity with Anu. Dildris is clearly onto something, but I struggle to say that Sothasil would say anything like this. I think Sothasil would just say something like, people do what they do because they can't do otherwise, which is what he actually said. I think that although Dildris might be saying something insightful and useful, she's just using Sothasil's name to state her own beliefs. Let's read the second paragraph. Set speaks of the second motion only in whispers. The pendulum, or named oscillation, is the tick-tock motion, the motion of entropy and false hope. None but the clockwork god may claim its dark power, for with each white swing it shouts Lorkhan's lie. Hail, intentions divided. Hail, cursed multitudes. Do not stand in the pendulum's path, Ash child. Only the mainspring ever wound can bear its weight. The second motion requires a lot of explaining. So far in this video, we have been talking about concepts like enlightenment, true will, and even Amaranth, only through the perspective of Dildris Movain. In fact, this may have puzzled those among you that know about these concepts from sources like the Sermons of Vivek and the works of Mankar Kamoran, because she massively alters a lot of terms. In a lot of other cosmological texts, the purpose of the world exists so that people can transcend higher than even it. According to other theories, Lorkhan didn't make the world because he was ignorant or because he had beef with Anu. He did so that everyone can have a chance to master themselves and the world and rise above it. This was the wish of Mankar Kamoran as well, that a person's own will, if liberated from its negative influences and if raised higher by the right forces, can overpower even the world itself and its makers. Dildris views these attitudes as motions of entropy and false hope, so dark and vile an endeavor like that of Lorkhan is that you shouldn't even engage with them. It is only the duty of Sothasil alone to stop these terrible ideals, and that's because they directly contradict the concept of Anuvanasi by stating that divided multitudes and self-realization are the real paths to apotheosis. This is certainly a mask-off moment for Dildris, and that's because Sothasil still wanted nothing more than to say maybe, to feel the hope that the prisoners had, and to be positively uncertain that him and other people can overcome the world. Dildris is no longer speaking Sothasil's will as she knows it, she's more or less speaking what she knows as if Sothasil said it. Again, that doesn't mean that it's all wrong. People who have followed Lorcan's path have done terrible things. It's just the case that she's going way off script. So, if following the world is an act of vanity, and if following one's desires is a dark path, what's the actual good path? Last is the reciprocating motion, the sublime piston, the lover's embrace. Like the father of mystery, it gives and takes in equal measure. As the bow upon the strings, it calls forth a sublime. As the carpenter's saw, it wrenches back and forth, sundering the named pursuits of lesser myrrh. Only the nameless heart may harness its strength. The artist, the star counter, and the engineer call it muse. The truth-blind multitudes call it destroyer. The last motion is that which seeks to heal the world through action, and truth-blind multitude is the best way I've ever heard anyone describe Mankar Camoran. This motion can only be achieved through love. It is a state under which one allows themselves to set the world right, and in doing so, they evolve along with the world until they both function as one. To quote Vivek, the lover is the highest country and a series of beliefs. He is the sacred city bereft of a double. The uncultivated land of monsters is the rule. This is clearly attested by Anu and his double, which love knows never really happened. It can be said that Dildris is kinda appropriating this teaching to mean something different. While both Vivek and Dildris acknowledge that love is the end goal here, and that love encompasses a wide spectrum, Vivek acknowledges Padme to some extent, whereas Dildris dismisses him altogether. But what if this isn't all that's going on here? What if what Dildris and Vivek are saying here is the exact same thing, just worded differently? What if sacred city bereft of a double actually means that Padme never existed, therefore Anu is complete? And what if love knows never really happened actually means that the interplay we understand from the creation myths never really happened? It's all just been Anu breaking himself because he loves himself and wants to understand himself fully. It's interesting as well, thinking about everything we have said about Nirn and the Clockwork City so far, it really makes you rethink a lot of the things from the sermons of Vivek. Notice how the law that comes as a product of Anu is the uncultivated land of monsters, kinda like Tamriel or the Clockwork City, but we have strayed too far from the path. The way Dildris describes the third line of motion is what a human does, according to their own nature, to set the world in the right path, just how a craftsman would practice his craft, and in doing so, lesser pursuits are proven wrong. Here she also states something new. In pursuing the world to come, one becomes guided by forces that transcend themselves. The rhythm and the joy felt from following the reciprocating path gives one the satisfaction of an artist looking at their work as if they were guided by a muse. The muse then becomes a source of inspiration for that person. Okay, but muses in the Elder Scrolls? This isn't Greek mythology. Indeed it isn't. Which is why right after saying this, she makes sure to tell us exactly what these muses are by describing them the exact same way that Mankar Camoran did. Destroyer. The muses are the Magna Gi, these forces of transcendence that at a previous time destroyed League so that its stasis can be shattered and Mazdia can die and the people can be free. We learn all of this from the commentaries on the Mysterium Xarxis, but knowledge of these topics isn't really needed here. It's just a fun little trivia. Just know that for Mankar Camoran, who is the truth-blind multitude, the Magna Gi, who are themselves daughters of Magnus, are forces that cause destruction, but for the Torbjorn, they take on a more classical form that one would associate with a muse. They guide people to act in ways which enable the transition to Tamriel final. Again, Mankar isn't a thing yet, so she isn't talking about Mankar, but let's be for real, it's all basically foreshadowing him. And then she finishes this sermon by saying this: "Do you see now, child of the tribunal? Every movement hides intent. To stray from the wheel is to abandon the clockwork god. In Tamriel final, all shall spin, and only spin. Anu Vanasi. There is motion in everything, even if one doesn't understand it. In Tamriel final, all will be part of the same nameless motion. Easy enough." Before we leave our old pal Hermes behind and move to different schools of thought, I want to talk briefly about another book of this mysterious author that bears a striking resemblance to what we just read. Yes, the similarities with the Corpus Hermeticum are still there, but this sermon in particular reads a lot like the Latin Asclepius. And I'm saying Latin Asclepius because the original Greek text was lost. This is the only one left. Also, we can't really tell if this one is completely unrelated to the Corpus Hermeticum or another book of that collection or just a companion to it. Either way, it reads a lot like them and it plays with the same characters. It's Hermes trying to teach his student Asclepius how to become one with the divine and engage in the perfect knowledge of the one. So again, the similarities are pretty apparent just from me describing it right now. And if you read the very first paragraph, it's the exact same motif as this sermon, but instead of Sothasil, the Torbjorn, and Anu, it's Hermes, Asclepius, and the one. I want to say a few things because I don't want to keep quoting an entire section from these books multiple times over. I wish I had read this book before doing the Vivek video as well, because so much of it feels like Sermon 13. And with regards to the truth in sequence, a lot of what is said in Asclepius certainly mirrors it. Even the muse being a divine instrument is something that is present in that book. But I want to focus on the core idea that makes the books so similar that I felt the need to talk about them together in an Elder Scrolls video, and by doing so probably confusing all of you. And that will be the idea that by being human and setting the world around you in order, one too can join with the God that is all, in the same motion as it. I read directly from Asclepius. Mankind was bound to be human only to this extent, that by contemplating divinity, he should scorn and despise that mortal part joined to him by the need to preserve the lower world. Now, in order for mankind in both his parts to have all that he can note, that he was formed with a coordinary of elements in either part, with pairs of hands and feet to serve the lower or earthly world, and with those four faculties of thought, consciousness, memory, and foresight, by means of which he knows all things divine and looks up to them. Hence, searching warily, mankind hands in things for variations, qualities, effects, and quantities. And yet, because the heavy and excessive vice of body slows him down, he cannot rightly discern the true causes of their nature. Given that mankind was made and shaped in this way, and that the Supreme God appointed him in such duty and service, if he observes the worldly order in an orderly way and complying duly and worthily with God's will in both its aspects, with what price do you believe such a being should be presented? Seeing that the world is God's work, one who attentively perceives and enriches its beauty conjoins his work with God's will. When lending his body in daily work and care, he arranges the scene formed by God's divine intention, the price that is for discharge and release of our worldly custody, of loosening the bonds of mortality, so that God may restore us pure and holy to the nature of our higher part. I mean, yeah, he basically summarized the entire sermon. Set the world in order and let go of your vices to join the one God. Later on, he even warns against sophists who will estrange the masses from the Godhead's truth, which sounds a lot like what Deirdre said about the second motion. There are a lot more parallels like these, but I think you get the big idea. Now let's return to the land of the Elder Scrolls and talk about the defeat of another Daedric prince in Sermon 8. Sermon 8. Blessed Father of Mystery, place your oil upon my tongue, that I might tell the true tale of Mornhold. Behold the strength of untold calculations. Behold the power of the mainspring Everwound. Every nameless soul must confess the truth of Mornhold, for many lessons hide in its ashes. Sing now the hymn of anguish and horror, child of Set. This is the one sermon that talks about a specific, verifiable Elder Scrolls event, and that event is the attack of Mornhold by Mehrunes Dagon in the year 2920 of the First Era. So to talk about some details, Sothasil made the Cold Harbor Compact between him and a bunch of other Daedric princes, under which no Daedric prince would ever summon themselves on Tamriel without a substantial intermediary calling them to Tamriel. For some reason, Mehrunes Dagon, who had also agreed to this compact, decided to attack Mornhold without being called by an intermediary the same year he agreed to it. And I say without being called, there are some sources stating that he was called by an ex-lover of the king of Mornhold after she thought that the king had sent assassins after her, but as it turns out, those weren't assassins, they were just a bunch of orcs. But by the time she figured that out, she had already summoned Dagon. Either way, summoned Marex hardly sounds as a substantial intermediary. There is another source that states that this was done simply because he's too chaotic and wouldn't just bind himself to an agreement with the fake god. This was his demise, however, as although he had destroyed the city, Sothasil and Almalexia defeated him in combat, with his broken body being tossed back to oblivion, and it seems like he learned his lesson from all this, as when he tried to do something like this again, he would do so via legit intermediaries, like Mankar Camoran. Let's see Deldrisa's spin on this tale, as apparently, she seems to think that it's an important story, one that all must know if they wanna become nameless souls. Behold, Mehrunes Dagon, Sovereign of Destruction, Mehrunes Dagon, the Flame Tyrant, Mehrunes Dagon, Father of Cataclysm. Recall how he marched upon Almalexia's jewel. Do you remember how his wheel burned like kilnfire, and hot pitch fell from his lips? Aloft, he held 4 great razors, each sang a screeching paean to glorify him. Torrents of flame fell upon the innocent and wicked alike, shearing flesh from bone, blenching forth widows and orphans, in gouts of frothing screams. Who dares to face me, draped as I am in fire and blood? Roared Dagon. The Dark Prince beat his breast, and howled long-forgotten curses. Geysers of black liquid sin erupted from below, flooding ruined homes with tyrant lies and conspiracy, and everywhere flames, an inferno that turned all souls to ash. There is nothing particularly difficult to talk about here. She just describes the scene of Mournhold's fall before Sothasil and Almalexia arrived. Her description of the topic is certainly fictionalized. The whole thing reminds me of something you would read in the Book of Revelations. We have seen the scenes of Mehrunes' destruction from oblivion, and the dead, in fact, did not burst from their tombs, and Mehrunes' razor does not scream. One thing that is a bit interesting to note, she seems to add an element of deceit to Mehrunes' mere appearance. For example, the geysers that Dagon erupted did not contain lava or brimstone, you know, the stuff that Dagon is known to bring. They brought lies and conspiracy. I think that here Deldris is focused on the element of doubt that the people of Mournhold had when Mehrunes was killing them, and the Almsivi was nowhere to be seen. It also kinda hints as to why Dagon attacked the place to begin with. Every action Dagon takes, according to the Tourbillon, is so that he may perpetuate himself and all that he stands for. He has to destroy because he is destruction. Every time he destroys something, it's as if he's receiving praise. People acknowledging Dagon as a destroyer might just be what he came here to do. He isn't someone who's going to be bound by a pact, and he's here to prove it. Almalexia, Mother of Mercy, cast her eyes upon the ruins of her gem city and wept. To see such love burn unsquandered turned her heart to molten brass. Our clockwork god took note of her fury, sealing the memory away in his great mnemonic planisphere, a reminder of her love's high price. Obviously, there's some dramatic foreshadowing going on here.
And Sothasil, he always thought himself our better, shunning us, locking himself in his hole. He spoke not a word as he died, not a whisper.
Again, Almalexia was made after the archetype of the overprotective mother. It sucks that we only got to see the worst aspect of her during the Tribunal DLC when her power was waning. Interestingly, although it mentions that Sothasil stored that memory in his mnemonic planisphere, I have found no such memory in there. It is possible that he held it a secret from everyone. We know that Sothasil was worried about Almalexia enough to mark her as an existential threat in his iOS program. Now let's go see how their fight played out. According to the Tourbillon, rising from the ground like foundry smoke, the tribunes confronted the Prince of Disasters, Aem's voice like a screeching steam whistle, and Sothasil like a lurching engine. Eram, var ai altadun, they cried, rendering their garments and donning their killing masks. Aem drew her bright hope's fire and skipped over the flames like a riverstone. With a mighty scream, she plunged her blade deep into Dagon's breast and turned it like a jailer's key. Scorching blood spewed out of the wound, scalding her hands and face. As she fell, the divine metronome chiseled a thought rune of infinite angles. Do you remember how the veins of tin, copper, and orichalc erupted from the depths to break our mother's fall? Through his will alone, Mighty Set wound the veins into god bronze whips and lashed the prince pitilessly. Dagon hissed and tumbled backwards. His otherworldly flesh fell like chaff before the scythe. Alas, a Sarmisanizum ghoul thing emerged from every chunk. So the two make it to Mournhold. Sothasil is is planning something to defeat the prince, and Almalexia is having a valid crash out. And then they both said this: Eram var I Altadun. What does this mean? Well, we only know what half of it means for sure. I Altadun means is weapon. Now, as for Eram var, we have nothing concrete. My best guess as to what the whole thing means would probably be something like, behold, we are changing, or something akin to that, because after they said that, they changed their appearances in order to prepare for the fight. So my money's on something like that. Feel free to add your own 2 cents. So, Ayem stabs Merun's Dagon, and when she does that, hot blood spews out and burns her face. When she falls because of that, Sothasil, with his thoughts alone, eases her fall so that she wouldn't get hurt, and then Ser made a whip using the materials that he used to break her fall, and with it he started lashing Dagon. We don't know exactly the origins of these ores. They could be Ayem's blood, they could be Dagon's blood, or they could be the byproducts of the divine metronome, but the whip is mentioned to have been made of god bronze, so it stands to reason that it was from a divine entity. Now, here is the funny thing about whips. They don't just cut the flesh that they make impact with, they tear it into bits. So as Sothasil does this, Dagon's flesh falls on the earth, and as a result of that, a new race of Daedric monsters, called the Ruinarchs, came forth. Chat, is this real? Grok, is this real? No, I don't think so. This sermon reminds me a lot of the sermons of Vivek, in its vocabulary but also its messaging. Here's another little Vivekism of taking credit for something you had nothing to do with, just because you think that the whole world revolves around you. I mean, it could always be the case that these things are indeed just Dagon's flesh, but I've also seen these things serve more like ball. There is an out-of-game source saying that this is all nonsense, and another one saying that these are just rumors. From the vibe I'm getting, it seems that the Eldris is pulling a Vivek on us. The Torbjorn just lost a lot of respect in my eyes. Let's see how Almalexia deals with these monsters. A multitude of creatures gathered around Ayem, fiery tar oozing from their mouths, and open sores. They groan and retched, speaking only Dagon's name as they fell upon her. The warden hissed thrice, took up her blessed sword, and smote the beasts by the score. She severed head from neck, and arm from shoulder, cleaving sin from virtue, and shouting old oaths of banishing. Do you remember how the beasts fell to her on that red day? So the battle continues. Almalexia starts killing the monsters born from Sothasil lashing Dagon. It's interesting how she mentions, if we remember how the beasts fell to her on that day. Who are these sermons for anyway? The main audience is supposed to be the Dark Elves that inhabit the Clockwork City. Are we supposed to assume that they were there when all this happened? Or is she just trying to make us feel the hype of the scene she's narrating? Because this continues on. You must recall the House of Madness, how Dagon foamed and snarled beneath the lash of Sothasil. Behold, cried the divine metronome, as he smashed the prince to splinters. Behold the wrath of old Sotha. No death at my hands, false son of a false father. Kir patum via Altadun. Even then, at the end, the prince of destruction did not relent. With the last of his 4 great arms, Dagon dragged the last of his 4 great razors across the watchmaker's jaw. So now Sothasil is going in for the kill. He has been waiting for this moment for centuries. He can get his revenge for what happened in Old Sotha. He keeps hitting Dagon with his whip, and he gets maybe just a bit too animated. He tells Dagon that he's a lie, and that his father is also a lie. Again, we don't know exactly what Kir Padom via Altadun means, but we know what Padom and Altadun means. So maybe it means something like, begone vile weapon of Padome? My money's on something like that. Then Dagon gets the better of him for a second, and he stabs Sothasil's jaw with one of his razors, tasting the blood on his tongue. Our father of mystery whispered a final chrononymic death word, and Dagon exploded throughout all time. The earth bones quaked, and the old axle shook. From these words of sundering, truth took root. Merunze's ruin slithered between the cracks of Nern and Oblivion, shrieking curses like a petulant child. The mainspring everwound, tightened his brass rod fist, and slammed the gap shut. Another small step towards Tamriel final. Anu Vanasi. So ends the true account of Monhold's fall. Remember this tale, always. So Sothasil gets fed up and casts a chrononymic death word to kill Dagon. I assume the word is something like, you're a lie, your dad is a lie, and you're both losers. Don't ever talk to me or my sister ever again. It was basically something reiterating to Dagon that he has no place in the greater cause of things. Now, I wanna break the illusion of what the Eldris is saying here and tell you what actually happened. After Set killed Dagon, after he did so, Dagon's body was dragged back to the Deadlands. It wasn't the complete defeat that Martin accomplished accomplished when he became the Avatar of Akatosh. When the rift to drag his body to the Deadlands was opened, it also sacked a large part of Mournhold and other defenders of the city. We know this because they played a part in some side content in ESO, but Sothasil closed the rift shortly after, so they got stuck there.
I came with the spire, crashed down after being ripped from my beloved Mournhold and flung into oblivion. Never really understood how I or any of us survived, but I stopped thinking about it. Mehrunes fetching Dagon flung me here with half the city.
And this is the true account of Mournhold, a step closer to Anvanasi, except not really. I mean, it's good that Dagon was beaten and all that, and the defeat did hurt him a lot, but also, he was up and running again in no time. And yeah, from that point onward, it could be said that he had to take the compact more seriously. So, is that the ultimate price for all this? We did it! No longer shall Mehrunes Dagon spawn on Nirn, just by the actions of anyone who calls upon his name. He now only listens to narcissists who have some degree of power, and this was done for the tiny price of the capital of Morrowind. Also, this event may or may not have created a new race of demons that we also have to deal with, but Ildris can't say all this, which I think is the real hidden subtext behind this entire sermon. Try to describe the destruction of Mournhold as realistically as you can. It will be something like this. Mehrunes Dagon appeared in Mournhold, maybe because of a misunderstanding, or maybe because of his love of the game. He destroyed the city, killed most of its inhabitants, then 2 tribunes came by, tried to banish him, got really hurt in the process, but ultimately succeeded. That being said, most of the city was destroyed. Also, Mehrunes is gonna be back in like 6 centuries tops, which, for him, I must imagine, it's gonna feel like a week's long vacation for his emotional well-being. So, is this entire story true, or is it just propaganda? Yeah, I'm inclined to believe that it leans on the propaganda side of things. I mean, don't get me wrong, I believe that Ildris really believes that all this actually happened. It's just that she's so faithful to Sothasil that she's not seen the greater picture, which is ironic because so far she has said a lot about the greater picture of the world. Oh well, but we also see this clashing of worlds, the good versus the evil, that is needed for the good to come out on top. And I don't want to focus too much on a real life influence behind this one, more so I want to make a quick mention of Zoroastrianism, because it has influenced a lot of what we talked about so far, and also because it's gonna be referenced directly in a little while, so I'm trying to ease you into that topic, but I haven't really felt the need to mention it because it doesn't fit anywhere. Zoroastrianism is an ancient Persian religion that plays by many of the same rules as the other ancient religions that we've mentioned already. Those would be patterns such as there is one god and the world is moving in a direction that will make it whole again, and it gets a lot more in depth from there. All I just talked about comes from the Gathas that are attributed to the religion's founder, a man by the name of Zarathustra. You might know this guy because, well, Nietzsche, and if you do, that's okay. We all need to start somewhere. Where this religion differs from the others is that it creates a very binary system of good and evil, under which system Asha stands for things that are rightful and true, and Drush stands for anything that is a lie or chaotic. Again, we see the same patterns emerging, but I must note that this religion far predates the other religions that we've talked about so far, at least according to most sources, and has therefore undoubtedly influenced a lot of them. And I think these are the parts we're interested in for the sake of this video. Just a quick mention. Also, I have here in my notes that Anu is the name of the Assyrian god that was regarded as the true ruler of the cosmos and the king of other gods. I didn't have anywhere else to put this, so I'm just gonna stick this note here. At this point, I'm just listing off my footnotes. Alright, that's enough of all that. Next sermon, please. Sermon 9. The mainspring Everwound values craft above all things. She who shapes and assembles, he who conceives and creates, these are the true children of the Clockwork God. We're back in Elder Scrolls esoteric lore territory. Though from the first lines, it might not seem so. It's just Ildris saying that he values crafting and creating. Let's see how this simple premise spirals into something more. I want to also say, all these sermons take place one after another throughout her life, with Sermon 1 being the earliest she ever wrote, and Sermon 12 being the last, as we will see when we get to it. And I am saying this because as things head towards the end, we will see that Torbjorn getting more and more desperate to defend the Clockwork City from a disillusioned populace that has, rightfully, begun to doubt the place. We have seen this so far plenty of times, so for this to be mentioned here as well, you can only imagine how much more prevalent this pattern will get as we go along. Your labors need not wear and hiss like the sublime clockworks of Sothasil, the brush, the auger, What? Are you sure it's called the Ogre?
Augur.
The augur, the tongs, the needle, each and each may honor the Father of Mysteries, so long as they speak his truth. And what is his truth? Child of Set. Perfection only? No. Hear the words in sequence. Simple precision is not but the shadow of virtue. Even the faithless myth may fashion the blade with the cleanest edge, the perfect sphere, the clearest glass, the truest angle. All fall short of his favor. Only through the purest incongruities and the greatest doubts do we earn his blessing. You must think with a thrice-folded mind. You must gaze upon the unsequence. All of this takes us back to what Dodri said at the very beginning of the first sermon, that sequence is but the shadow of truth, but minds such as ours cannot bear the ordered unsequenced. And if one wants to see the order unsequenced, they would know themselves truly. Now Dodri thinks that we know enough to start witnessing the ordered unsequenced. This order doesn't only take the form of words. Here we're referring to the order of the entire universe. Now we are witnessing the unsequencing of the entire order of the cosmos, and to do so, she first demolishes the very concept of sequence altogether. The truth in sequence isn't called that name because the sequence is the truth. It's called that way because the only way to figure out the truth is through the sequence. Anyone with some basic training can make something like a sharp blade or a perfectly round sphere. In fact, you don't even need to be perfect in those ways specifically. Simple perfection is only the shadow of virtue. In order to gain Sotha Sil's true favor, you need to embrace the unsequenced. You must accept doubts, mistakes, incompatibilities, everything that lacks simple order. You must think with a thrice-folded mind, which is also a nice little Vivekism. It could be a mention of the Sivi, as Vivek would put it, birth, machine, and the words between. It could also be something more sophisticated. Maybe she could also be referring to the three emotions that she mentioned during Sermon 7. In my opinion, it's probably the latter. I think what she's trying to say here is this: you have to gaze upon the realms of thought to gain their knowledge. That doesn't mean getting in their way or acting upon them. You just have to understand them. Let's keep reading. No mortal may grasp the unsequence fully. We see the edges only, the liminal truths. For some, the unsequence brings despair. Others look upon it with a child's bewilderment. But for the precious few, the nameless explorers, this thin ray of understanding may serve as the bridge of infinite curves, the walking wheel. Unknown metaphysical terms used to give some kind of unique insight. We are in deep Vivek country now. So she starts by setting boundaries. No mortal can grasp the ordered unsequenced, but we can look at some parts of it. That being said, people do look at it differently. Some get scared. Others look at it with a child's bewilderment. Others look at it like clueless children. But for just a few people, the nameless explorers, as she puts it, it brings new understandings that may serve as the pathway to something called the bridge of infinite curves, or the walking wheel, as she puts it. I want to give some perspective here. Untimely events in the Tess universe are associated with gaining Numantia. We saw this with Vivek in the 37th sermon and with Mankar in the first commentary. We are talking about untimely events, like for instance, dragon breaks. Hello, editing Kotha again. So it seems that I didn't give a definition for Numantia. Numantia in the Elder Scrolls is the concept by which one being, often mortal, changes their nature into something different and oftentimes become immortal. Usually, this means that they become divine, but in Mankar Camoran's writings, it more so comes across as a being changing its nature fundamentally into becoming something different according to their own will and not depending on the world around them. So think of it kinda like that, right? Editing Kotho out. I think that Dodris doesn't know what to do with these facts, but she knows they exist. On one hand, can you blame her? They are dangerous and can warp reality, but on the other hand, they are absolutely essential to gain the insights required to obtain Numantia. So she has to tell people, hey, maybe don't bother with that kind of stuff unless you are a very specific kind of person, like a nameless explorer, people who were willing to give up on their sense of self in order to embrace another. Mankar says something similar about going unrecorded, and Vivek says more or less the same. game in his own little Vivek way. He says this: the victor is the magical disc, hurled to reach the heaven by violence. I think the magical disc is what Dildris would call the walking wheel. It can also be referenced in the walking ways, which lead back to more or less the same. So Dildris is telling people to start analyzing the order without the sequence. In small ways though. Don't get too carried away. Only few can do so completely fully. Interesting, considering that Mankar and Vivek both told everyone that everyone can make it, where she says that only few can. So, how do these teachings compare with each other? Know this, Ash child, only the intrepid mind may walk this path. For you see, the nameless sword is the tightrope walker that strides in circles only. Below and aside waits the gaping maw of Sheogorath's lie. Ahead and above waits Tamriel Final, Anu Vanasi. Okay, we have to solve a small geometry puzzle to make sense of this one. So this is time. This is time under a dragon break. For those of you who are just listening to this because you're at the gym or doing your homework or something, the first line of time is basically a straight line, and the second one is the same, but also divided with smaller lines below and above it. Never say Kotho made you pause your set. If you were to just go backwards during a dragon break, according to Dildris, you just end up mad. Watch Manka for example, or if you're of the idea that the sermons of Vivek take place in an alternate timeline caused by a dragon break, that could also be a good example. If you were to go forward in a dragon break, you will reach what the Torbjorn believes is the ultimate end goal of all things, Anu Vanasi. Only the nameless explorer, like for example Vivek during Sermon 37, can go full circle without going mad or ending up beyond time's end. Easy, right? Now how do we do all this? I hear your cries, child of Set. How does one walk the wheel? Here lies a nameless truth, just as no wrench fits all bolts, no walk fits all souls. For the sculptor, it may mean an angle inverted or a form transposed, an abandonment of a name resemblance, and an embrace of the abstract. For the scholar of maths, it could require half-math theorems, rooms of cubic numbers, and functions only imagined. For the inventor, it may demand a tool without any known use, or an answer machine that prints only questions. Craft perfected and use obscured, this is the surest path to Tamriel Final, Anu Vanasi. To be honest, I couldn't settle on the two theories for what she's trying to do by saying all this, or why she's saying it, so I'm gonna talk about both of them. Theory number one, Dildris is completely unaware of the walking ways, and or doesn't want people to figure them out. The way to walk the world, to reach the walking wheel, is via the 6 walking ways. Those are ways to achieve apotheosis and transcend above all the laws of the world. For more information on this topic, I made a different video about them a while ago. We know very well that, as Vivek puts it, 6 are the formulas to heaven by violence. So why isn't she just stating them? Because they don't lead to Anu Vanasi, they lead to the opposite. The 6 walking ways are a direct product of what Lorcan did, and Lorcan is the great liar. Why would she tell people to copy Lorcan? Under this theory, Dildris has went full mask off on us. Yeah, you could argue she wants people to be safe, or she doesn't fully understand them, and doesn't want to send anyone to a journey that will get them killed. That's all possible. But until this point, she has been correct about most things, from what exactly Ascension is, to how it works, and she has even come up with her own terminology. But now she's suddenly going, yeah, just craft. Don't bother trying to figure out why it is you're crafting, just get to it. This is the first theory, and it's by far the least friendly one towards our friend here. But what if this isn't what she's actually doing? What if she is seeing things that we don't, and has an understanding of the world and the people that live in it better than they understand themselves, and therefore she also understands something unique about all these endeavors? Theory number 2, she's telling people to become what Vivek would call a letter written in uncertainty. This is something Vivek says a lot throughout the sermons. The world you will rule is only an intermittent hope, and you must be the letter written in uncertainty. What if she's saying the exact same thing here, telling people to perfect their own uncertainties to gain new insights? What that means is going beyond causality, essentially fulfilling Sothasil's second requirement to become a prisoner.
The prisoner must see the door to their cell. They must gaze through the bars and perceive that which exists beyond causality, beyond time. Only then can they escape.
She's giving people the recipe to become a prisoner. She just spent 9 sermons talking about the nature of things in order to allow us to see the nature of the world, what Sothasil would call the reality of our imprisonment, and now she's telling the reader how to see and act beyond the determinative walls, not through Lorcan's path, but through Set's, so that Anu can be enlightened through the clockwork god. Personally, I lean towards the latter theory. I think she's trying to correct Lorcan's mistake in her own way. It's as if she disagrees with the very definition that Lorcan gave for apotheosis. It's not about the apotheosis of the individual, it's about the apotheosis of the collective. And yeah, it makes sense, Lorcan was selfish. Why should everyone have to abide by him, when according to all this, everyone, by merely following their own crafts in specific ways, can act beyond causality? And that was the end of this sermon. From the 12 sermons, this is probably my favorite one. It references a lot of stuff, and it leaves you scratching your head, but despite all that, it's also direct and blunt. The Torbjorn never shies away from answering questions that people might have. She gives herself questions and answers them on the spot. You just have to analyze what she's saying and why she's saying it, and then evaluate the points she makes based on her own biases. I don't have any real life influences for you here. This section has been complicated enough. Are you getting Vivek flashbacks yet? You should be. 3 more to go. You're doing great there. Hold on tight. Let's see what Sothasil's top gal has to say in the next sermon. Sermon 10. Beware blind reverence of the old, child of Set. The oil of antiquity often fuels the future. Those who ignore the counsel of our blessed ancestors do so at their peril, but not all ruins hide wisdom within their shattered halls. Some ruins are dark and barren places, unsteady graves for lies and curses, resting places for bent axles, stripped bolts, and the bitter silence of inertia. Welcome to another good life advice sermon by Dildris Movain, which will soon spiral into 10 different topics. This sermon's good life advice is respect the dead, and we will see instantly that she's gonna present this topic from a unique angle. First, she states that we shouldn't revere our ancestors blindly, but nevertheless, we shouldn't ignore their counsel either. Some of the things they believe in are curses and lies, and some are actually important lessons that we must heed. Respecting your ancestors is one of the most crucial dogmas of the Tribunal Temple, and unlike many other pillars of the temple, this is one that the 3 actually abide by. Remember, Sothasil tried to make the 3 living saints in Asylum Sanctorum immortal, and the first thing that Vivek does during the events of ESO is send someone to ask for the counsel of a Dunmeri ghost on his behalf. So which parts should we revere, and what is it that causes inertia, meaning stasis? In the time before our father's rise, old and feeble knowledge ruled the hearts of Mer. The children of Ash entered their ancestral tombs not in search of truth, but in search of truth's corpse. They saw their forebears not as proud and vigorous guides, but as wheezing, toothless ghosts, guardians of the musty and Dalek dungeons that fools call deep wisdom. The Torbjorn splits the wisdom given by ancestry into 2 categories, that which causes stasis and that which allows for real knowledge to develop. But she doesn't say that directly. She doesn't say learn X from your ancestors. She says that people enter those tombs in search of falsehoods, and in doing so, they misinterpreted the teachings of their ancestors. They saw them not as guides to a bright future, but as holders of ancient, unquestioning wisdom. To paraphrase what I think she's trying to say, you shouldn't look at your ancestors' history and blindly copy their way of life and their beliefs. You should study how they lived, understand how and why they did so that you can evaluate where you're heading now. In this way, your ancestors become guides, rather than guardians of some archaic principle of thinking that does nothing to serve the present. Though I might be giving her a bit too much credit, it could always be that she is saying all this so that people don't question why the Dunmer are worshipping the Amsivi instead of the 3 good Daedra. These lines are getting thinner and thinner as we go along, so much so that it could just be both of them. Let's keep reading. You must smash these old machines, child of Set. Okay, Mankar. You must smash these old machines, child of Set. The past does not rust upon the scrap pile. It hurls towards the mainspring ever once glorious and multi-angled future, whipped by the scorching tongues of our honored forebears. Ever do their words and deeds grip grist the wheels of the Nirn ensuing, ever do they weld the seams of Tamriel final, Anu Vanasi. Okay, here she's doing two things at once. On one hand, it could be argued that this is a form of historical revisionism, whereby she's using the ancestors of the Dunmer as a prompt to put her own ideals and God on a pedestal. And on the other hand, she also puts a lot of attention in describing said ancestors in a positive light, because obviously that means that if their words are true and they agree with her, then surely that must mean that what she's saying is also true. Notice that throughout all of this, not once does she describe a single specific ancestor. She just leaves it as a generic conglomeration of the concept of ancestry. Imagine it like the tribunal making Nervar a saint in their temple despite betraying him and him being a champion of Azura. She's doing the same, but to all ancestors as a collective. Does she actually believe in all this? Yeah, I think so. She's not a Vivek character. She really thinks that Anuvanasi is the end-all be-all, and that even if their ancestors didn't know or didn't admit to it, they were still heading towards that end goal. Let's read some more. And I'm gonna warn you, she changes topics very suddenly, so note that we are still reading the same sermon. But alas, even now, stewards of the old feed aged truth to those who would listen. They are the daughters and sons of Siege, who crouch like gargoyles over musty tomes, faces hidden beneath frayed and graying robes. They counsel caution, temperance, and equanimity, ancient virtues of the fading Nirn prior. Even so, the father of curiosity calls them friends. With a god's patience, he teaches them. With a father's love, he guides them, all in hopes that one day they may see the deepest truth of the old, that we must banish our feeble ghosts and give their memory new life through the thrice folded mind. Here she does something clever by saying that as the ancestors of the Dunmer worship the Daedra, so do the Sijiks worship outdated ideals in the form of the Siege. What she's doing here is flipping the terms. The Order of Siege is known as the Order of Change, of constant evolution. As Vivek puts it, this is the flowering scheme of the Orbis. This is the promise of the Siege. Egg, image, man, god, city, state. I serve and am served. I am made of wire and string and mortar, and I exceed my own precedent. World without arm. In case you don't speak Vivek, what he's saying here is this: I go from one state of being to another by interacting with others and them interacting with me until my will outweighs the world around me. So Dodris comes here and says that actually these ideals of change are old and dumb and part of Lorkhan's great lie. The only change is towards Anuvanasi, and Sothasil knows this so well that he has went to Artaeum just to teach the members of the Sijic Order the new and better way of things. If you don't remember, Sothasil mentored in the home of the Sijic Order. It's been a long video, so I feel the need to keep placing reminders. Again, one cannot help but read this without thinking that the Torbjorn is doing some pretty intense mental gymnastics on behalf of Sothasil, or you could also say she's doing some pretty heavy lifting to make sense of her own beliefs about Sothasil. So in her mind, the Order of the Siege is actual outdated nonsense that has to be destroyed and repaired, and so are the opinions of the ancient Dark Elves. Now let's read the final paragraph of this sermon. By the way, I'm gonna read the whole thing because a lot of stuff is repeated at this point. None will deny that the sons and daughters of Siege wield great power. Like our clockwork city, their Isle of Artaeum glides between what is and what may be. Like our clockwork apostles, they study, strive, and create. But power without an infinite future's courage is like an empty boiler, infused with fierce heat, but producing no steam. Woe upon those who recoil from Tamriel final. Anu Vanasi, the will of the clockwork god, turns such ignorance to slag. But rejoice, the father of mysteries' affection proves the Siege's worth. One day these lost spellweavers will heed the words of the divine metronome and seek the true and noble change, the Aratagnithir. On that day, we shall embrace them not as friends, but as brothers and sisters. So again, she's doing with the Sijic Order the same thing she did with the ancestors of the Dunmer. First she talks positively about them, and then she states, actually, the Sijic Order's goal is the exact same goal as the one I'm preaching right now. They just haven't caught on yet, which I guess you can argue that if you believe that Anu Vanasi is the real end goal of all things. And I really believe that she does think that all this is true. It just feels weird to see someone who knows so much about so many different things hijack a term just like this. Even if she does believe that everything she's saying here is the truth, she also calls them cowards for not accepting the new way of things, which is her way of things, by the way, which is, you know, a bit on the nose, given that she was praising them literally 2 lines ago. And she closes this sermon by stating that one day they will seek the true and noble change, which she describes in a new term, Arataknithir. This term has a particularly Zoroastrian sound to it. There are only loose connections with actual terms. It's kinda broken Zoroastrianism, which by the way, the language is called Avestan. Apparently it's an old Persian language. There are other terms, like Verethragna, that means something like obstacle breaker. I'm not an expert translator. All I'm gonna say, from a cursory Google search and from the context we have here, I'm guessing it must mean something like Fire of Truth. So after they receive the Fire of Truth, they will join the Clockwork Apostles and everything will be awesome forever. No, for real, trust. End of sermon. As we approach the end of this sermon, it can be easy to forget that we haven't heard a word from Sothasil other than the few odd reminders from the last video. So I want to take a small section here and show you Sothasil's actual view on ancestry, or at least a different one than the one Deodris has been talking to us about. And there is no better way to do that other than by talking about his daughter, Memory, the one you might also know as Mnemoli. Now, for this section, the line between canon and non-canon gets a bit tricky, so whenever I say that something is from the Coda novel, know that it's not canon, but the Clockwork City DLC and Sermon 37 do reference the Coda a bunch of times, so I do take it into some consideration. With that said, the 37th Sermon of Vivek says the following: Set held his swollen belly to its name, Clockmaker's daughter, swimming the dead confession along a century of thread, naming her Uneaten, a golden cache of Veloth and Velothi, for where else would they know to go? Go here, world without will, charting 0 deaths, and echo singing, said, until all of it was done, and in the center of anything whatever, and then a dragon break happens, and Mnemoli tells this to Vivek: the sign of royalty is not this. A signal blue shift, female, told him, there is no right lesson, learned alone. You can find the exact same words that I just read in the 9 coruscations, under Mnemoli's section. Along with this, retroactively constructed by the named her Uneaten, appears when the dragon Untime, frozen moments of unfettered destiny, unbound time gives way, dragon break, as it was in the dawn, endless possibility, rewritten narratives, always there is born a prisoner unbound. So, to piece the story together, Sothasil makes Memory, who is a carrier of the collective memory that people share together, and Memory is untimely, meaning she does not exist within linear time. Therefore, she existed before her birth. She doesn't exist in time, per se. She exists within untime. Mankar even says this when he says, they run blue through noise, and shine only when the earth trembles with the eruption of the newly mantled. During the Dawn era, before the laws of the world existed, which does include linear time by the way, Mnemoli was there, which is why she's also a daughter of Magnus. Though I have to note, Magnus is the god of magic, Sothasil is the mage of the Sivi, and he's also called the Magus, which means mage. So Mnemoli is created by Sothasil as this receptacle that enables change through the collective memories of everyone that has ever existed in Tamriel. So where does this put Sothasil in all of this? What is his end goal in all of this? It seems to me that he wants to give people what he could never have himself, the ability to say maybe, and he knows that for all of this to happen, he must remind them of where they came from. Mnemoli is a manifestation of the collective memories of the past, and she was created to give everyone a chance for their existence to mean something more. Because, let's be for real, the common mortals in the Elder Scrolls universe have been catching strays for about 3 book series now. Vivek says that most of them were born destined to die. Mankar recommends killing them, and Deodris calls them lesser wheels, born and lost in a sea of endless sky, which is the colorful way of saying they don't matter. But all along, Sothasil did want something more for everyone. He wants as many people as possible to rewrite their own narratives and become unbound prisoners. And I don't think Deodris gets that. Mankar kinda believed in the same thing, but he was too obsessed with his own idea of free will that he didn't understand that at the end of the day, everyone is gonna define free will in their own way. When looking at it like that, I guess you can't say that Deodris and Mankar are 2 sides of the same coin. One says, you're gonna be free even if I have to torture it out of you, and if you oppose this, well, I'm just gonna kill you. And the other one says, there is only one freedom, one end goal. You're either a part of it, or you're not. Out of all these sermons we have read so far, I feel like it's in Sermon 10 that Deodris has lost the plot. Sothasil believes that through the collective memories of everyone, we can all be free. We see this happening in the Korra novel. The main character of the novel is able to remember the past of Tamriel by talking with Memory, and those who have forgotten Memory no longer remember their own past, which makes time work in weird ways. And in the end, Memory leaves after talking with the main character one last time, that would be Jubal, and he goes on to gain Amaranth, or give birth to a child that is the Amaranth, which is what Sothasil could never do. By the way, has anyone else noticed that Sothasil's daughter is a blue star that holds people's memories, and that Sothasil's mnemonic planisphere is a chamber of blue stars that holds his memories? This man is playing 5D chess, and we're only just now catching up. And that was my commentary on Sermon 10. So, do you come here often? Say, remember when X amount of hours ago I said that knowing what's going on in the 36 sermons of Vivek isn't necessary to understand these sermons? In hindsight, it feels like I kinda lied, but I hope things here make sense. Anyway. Sermon 11. I hear your whispers, your pure elements. Even here in the Clockwork City, bathed in the oil of his divine wisdom, you cry out, where are the soft grasses and bubbling creeks? Where are the heady wines and rich fruits? Where are the gentle rains and sighing boughs and swaying mushrooms? Like hungry babes you weep, where is the real? Welcome to the Hyperreality Sermon. In this sermon, we will examine what a hyperreality is and what it can tell us about what is real and what is not. All, of course, through the totally non-biased lenses of our beloved Torbjorn. But what is a hyperreality? Definition by Jean Baudrillard, author of this sermon's supplementary text, Simulacra and Simulations, a condition where the distinction between reality and its simulation collapses, causing fabricated representations to become more real than reality itself. If you can't see how this relates to the Clockwork City, you might want to hold on. We have a hell of a sermon for you. Also, it goes without saying at this point, but Deldris's tone in this one gets a bit on the gaslighty side of things. It is an Anuic law that every character who decides to write something profound in the Elder Scrolls universe must do so while trying to lie to us. So that Torbjorn begins by stating an issue that has begun to emerge within the city. The inhabitants have begun to question, what is the beauty in all this? They were taught that the Clockwork City is a glorious realm, a Nirn in miniature, but it looks nothing like Nirn. It looks like a worse version of Nirn. It's artificial, it feels fake, it appears like a flawed imitation of the real thing. But even here, Deldris says that these complaints still contain divine wisdom within them, so she faces the issue directly by asking, what is real? Let us read her response. Is it the blood, or the sap, or the beating heart? Is it the shrieking trauma of an infant's birth, the low roar of the tides, the root's thirst for water, or the lazy drift of distant clouds? No, child of Set, hear the words in sequence. Can you not see that your fears spring from Lorkhan's great lie? Those soft forms and gentle comforts you covet are not but corroded lies, fractured creation's panacea that deadens the soul's forgotten pain. So she begins by describing things and environments that one might associate with the actual Tamriel. Notice how she mixes the stuff that you might think as positive with others that sound negative. She's putting terms like beating heart right next to the trauma of an infant's birth, followed up by the sound the tides of the sea make. From what we know, women can give birth in the Clockwork City just fine. She's mixing these terms together to make you question whether something being physically real is even worth it to begin with, because, as she will say next, it isn't. To summarize her argument as best as I can, what she says after she states, hear the words in sequence, is something like this. The fear one experiences from the replacement of one reality for another is a product of fabricated conditions generated by ignorance. Lorkhan's lie. In simpler terms, mortals have grown attached to Nirn, and Nirn was created by Lorkhan's great lie, a lie which distracts us from Anu and his everlasting perfection, and in doing so, mortals have created flawed imitations of the joy one experiences from existing in said everlasting perfection, and those joys are now given to them by comforts that exist on Nirn. A tree is nice to look at, the tides of the sea are nice to hear, and a beating heart is a good indicator that someone is alive and healthy, but all these factors that generate joy are false simulacrums before the real, everlasting joy that can only be obtained by reuniting with Anu and remembering the face of the ultimate creator. Everything else that generates joy is a product of lies made to provide fake comforts, and in doing so, drifting mortals further away from their forgotten pain. But just because it has been forgotten doesn't mean it's not there, and although it has evolved throughout the ages, and because of all these fake simulacrums of comfort, it's still exist in some way. Instead of attempting to satisfy the soul with fake substitutes, the Tourbillon says that we should go after the real cause of our estrangement, which are generated by the world itself. But where does the Clockwork City fit into all this? But is Sothasil's sacred city not a replication, you ask? An urn in miniature? Hear this, Ash Child. The Clockwork City is no mere simulacrum. The copper leaves and sculpted hills are not Nirn's resemblance, but Nirn's refinement. Worldly forms made whole by the steady hand of the mainspring Everwound. The glorious unity of Tamriel Final demands convergence. Anu Vanasi, mere and machine made whole. Nature and engineering made whole. The past and the future made whole. This part is really simple and also a bit deceiving. For context, remember that a lot of people who have found their way to the Clockwork City did so without their will and have been prohibited from living by the Clockwork Apostles, and many of them have had to pick up scraps in a place called Slugtown just to make ends meet. Their diet consists of paste, their living conditions are horrible, and almost everything that exists outside the city wants to kill them. They constantly beg the Clockwork Apostles to send some kind of help, but very little ever comes. You know what this section reminds me of? If I'm being as cynical as I can be, this section reminds me of North Korean TV, where they portray North Korea as this place of opportunity and freedom, the last bastion of hope in the world, despite food shortages being a constant, especially in rural regions. This is the vibe I'm getting from this section. I can't see how replacing real items with their clockwork equivalents will bring forth a new state of being, and she tries to paint this as some kind of grand convergence, whereby humans unite with machines, and in doing so, they also unite with their future. But come on, Deldris, this is weak. If you want to paint the Clockwork City's design in this fashion, you can make it a lot more convincing. Say something like, the existence of these mechanical simulacrums serves to make one question what is it that makes a thing real, and where the concept of reality comes from, therefore proving that there exists no objective reality under Lorkhan's great lie, only a simulacrum which has hijacked the greater reality of all things. I am deeply disappointed by the Tourbillon here. She needs to take notes from Mankar. That guy made the process of getting tortured by Daedra sound almost noble. And yeah, you could argue that if Anu Vanasi means Sothasil's enlightenment of Anu, then that must mean that Sothasil is portraying something more perfect than the real of Tamriel. But this section, in my opinion, is the weakest in the sermon. It's not very metaphysical, and the propaganda feels half-baked. Anyway, let's keep reading. In time, all of Nirn shall be pressed and fired. In this forge of Set's blessed imaginings, weighed and measured upon the nameless scales. Is this not the real? Is this not the redemption of the Etata sins? Do you see now the impoverished forms of the Nirn prior, the cheap and hollow falsehoods that masquerade as nature's splendor? Now this is way better. She's warping the very definition of real altogether, from it being something tangible to an ideal. The ideal being the Nirn ensuing and Anu Vanasi. If the destiny of all things is the Nirn ensuing and the enlightenment of Anu through Sothasil, and if the Clockwork City is a conduit to these concepts, then surely the Clockwork City is more real than Tamriel. Fantastic work, Deldris. Through this sermon, we have went from the initial complaint, which was, this place is unlivable, to, this place is more real than reality. Therefore, you should learn to love it here. Also, you're stuck. It's again the phenomenon we talked about earlier, where, as we go along, she becomes more and more desperate to hold on to the ideas of Sothasil as she knows them. If you remember the Cogs of Fate quest, this often clashes with Sothasil's actual intentions. Sothasil made a machine to divinate people's futures so that they can improve their lives, and the Clockwork Apostle that helped him make the machine questioned whether Sothasil wanted to do so or not, so he hid its actual use from everyone, despite Sothasil never saying anything like this. But back to the main argument. In her mind, something being real is something that brings the world closer to Anu Vanasi and redeems the mistakes of the Edada and Lorkhan's great lie, and all other forms that took root as a result of the Nirn prior are nothing but cheap imitations masquerading as nature's splendor. These forms aren't real, they obscure what's real, and the sermon ends with this: seek out the dry, hard places, child of Set, anoint your tongue with his oil, fill your stomach with his nourishing grain, cast out what was, and fix your eyes upon the Nirn to come, upon Tamriel final, Anu Vanasi. So I think what Deldris is trying to say here is Slugtown isn't getting any humanitarian support anytime soon. Sorry, she doesn't make the rules, she only listens to the guy who makes the rules, and then does what she thinks the guy who made the rules meant when he was making the rules, and he wants wants you to starve. At this point, one might say that Dildris has more in common with Mankar Camoran than with Sothasil. They both confuse the term reach heaven by violence to the point that it means torture yourself. What reach the heaven by violence actually means is that by willingly placing yourself in harm's way via something like the 6 working ways, you can reach a greater state of being. And you could argue that that's what she's doing here as well, but I don't get how living in filth and squalor is gonna help someone reach a higher state of being, or letting go of previous perceptions of material forms so that they can grasp immaterial truths. I think that Dildris is trying to play it both ways, and at that point, she's starting to lose it. On one hand, she needs to keep everyone in the Clockwork City calm to maintain the status quo, and on the other hand, she really does believe in Anuvanasi, and that all are part of the same greater plan that will lead to everlasting unity. And now she has to explain why staying in the Clockwork City will lead to that final state. So she states that by simply being in the Clockwork City, one can gain enlightenment merely by interacting with Sothasil's creations, because by doing so, they destroy old material forms and make way for new ones, which will apparently lead to Tamriel Final. Maybe if Anuvanasi is a correct concept, she might be right. Maybe this is what it takes, and to some extent, it must have worked on her. But here is a fundamental question. In the Clockwork City, there are a lot of people who have lived their entire lives in the city itself. How is the Clockwork City supposed to dismantle the simulacrum that Nirn is if they have only ever known these forms as they exist in the Clockwork City? That's the problem that I'm seeing with Dildrisa's logic. She's describing substitution with other material forms as a means of overcoming them altogether. But what do I know? Wait, I know what I know. The real life philosophy behind this sermon. Simulacra and Simulation by Jean Baudrillard. The main thesis of this book is stated early on as this: today's abstraction is no longer that of the map, the double, the mirror, or the concept. Simulation is no longer that of a territory, a referential being, or a substance. It is the generation by models of the real, without origin or reality, a hyperreal. Essentially, due to the ever-increasing presence of mass media and other forms of cultural as well as creative expression, our perception of reality is now forever intertwined with the media that we consume, and in doing so, it has created a hyperreality. A simulation copies the real, a simulacrum copies the simulation. A key principle of this book is that there is no objective reality. The simulacrum is never that which hides the truth. It is truth that hides the fact that there is none. The simulacrum is true. This is the point where Baudrillard and the tourbillon differ. For the tourbillon, there is an objective truth. It's just hidden beneath layers upon layers of simulacrums, each concealing the ultimate truth further by providing flawed imitations of it, whereas something like the Clockwork City isn't just a simulacrum, it is a refinement of a simulacrum made to display the process by which one can escape all simulacrums and find the original, Anu. On the endless layering of simulacrums on top of other simulacrums, Baudrillard says this: the real is produced from miniaturized cells, matrices, and memory banks, modes of control, and it can be reproduced an indefinite number of times from these. It no longer needs to be rational, because it no longer measures itself against an ideal or negative instance. It is no longer anything but operational. In fact, it's no longer the real, because no imaginary envelops it anymore. It is a hyperreal. To bring it back to the metaphysics of Dildris, something like the actions of the Dwemer or Lorcan's actions are imitations of the real actions that have to be taken and will be taken by following Sothasil in order to reach a higher state of being. Anything else is simulacrum, while the Clockwork City is the rightful simulation from which one can extract the truth. And that was Sermon 11. One more to go. We're almost there. The last sermon Dildris Mulvane ever wrote. Are you aware that this might just be the last sermon that I ever analyze on this channel? This is history on the making. Let's go. Sermon 12. I have spoken the words in sequence, child of Set. I have guided your eyes to the glorious Nirn and Suin, to the inevitable grandeur of Tamriel Final, Anu Vanasi. I have shouted my grave admonitions, and whispered the secrets of the infinite curve. Now, as my engine fails, I bestow upon you my final blessing. You who sing the song of making, and set wheel to axle. You intrepid star counters, who shatter the old machines, and smelt new truths from the crude and forgotten ores of the Orbis. You must hear this ultimate lesson. So, obviously, the tone of this one is different. Using clockwork terminology, Dildris informs us that she's dying. The exact cause of death is never made clear, but it can be said that it's a natural death of old age, if she still has time to write a sermon for us. And she starts by stating that she has said everything she wants to say about the world, as well as some secrets about the infinite curve, which is just another word for dragon breaks. Or if you want to be less metaphysical about it, it could also mean the current state of the world, where multitudes prevail, the current status quo. In any case, she has done what she has set out to do, which is to tell us the truth in an understandable way, and in doing so, she understands that we too have changed as a result of this. We now sing the song of making. We are destroyers of the old. She only has one last lesson for us, one last blessing. Tamriel final shall change you in ways both grand and terrifying. Anu Vanasi, just as molten brass cools in its mold, so too will your body take on a new and hardened shape. Just as water changes from liquid to steam, so too will the cheap preoccupations of your mind disperse and fade. Just as oil ignites and powers the engine, so too will your soul glow bright and drive the wheels eternal. The unity of Tamriel final must wash away our selfish pursuits and jealous will. Ash child, Anu Vanasi. It is difficult to convince someone that they must let go of all their material belongings, even their very definition of self that contains material descriptions, but exactly like Mankar, that is exactly what she does now. In fact, what she just said kinda perfectly describes Mankar's transformation. There are no more subtle cues about propaganda or ways to exist within Clockwork City society. There is no more time for that. She's dying. Now she just wants to write about what she wishes about all of us. The abandonment of the material and the shallow, and the embracing of a path that will result in Anuvanasi, in a state where the world, the wheel, will spin in eternal perfection. I know I usually talk about the real life influences at the end of the sermon, but given that things will get very complicated, given what she will say next, I feel the need to pause here and talk about the elephant in the room throughout all these sermons. I know for a fact that people who have watched my previous videos on topics such as this, even the last one, have all been screaming as hard as they can at their monitors about how much all this resembles the Gnostic worldview, with Lorcan being the demiurge and Anu being the pleroma. For those of you that are new here, Gnosticism was an early off-branch of Christianity that claimed that the material world was made by a flawed creator, which was the God of the Old Testament, and that the goal of every human is to reunite with the immaterial world that exists beyond this one. This world beyond the material goes by many names: the adamantine land, incorruptibility, the pleroma, to name only a few. This pattern I just mentioned has been constant throughout all this video, and I've omitted talking about it so far because it's kinda been constant in most of my videos, which is why I'm keeping it until the very end of this one. But here, in order to understand what Dildris is about to say, her final blessing, as she puts it, we need to talk about the 7 Sermons to the Dead by Carl Jung, the patient zero of overly complicated esoteric sermons that teach important knowledge about the world and the relation of the self within said world. Carl Jung was a Swiss psychoanalyst, and the 7 Sermons to the Dead is a book he wrote under the pseudonym Basilides of Alexandria, who was an ancient Gnostic teacher. The contents of the 7 Sermons to the Dead are very similar to stuff we've been talking about throughout this video, as Gnosticism too was inspired by Hermetic practices and Platonism. What makes the 7 Sermons different from these practices and even older Gnosticism is that he places human consciousness, and more importantly the human will, as the very conduit to transcend the world. There can be no entrance into any material world by a human without the human following their own will and abandoning the desires of the world they exist in. To do so, man must be guided by a will that transcends him, something referred to in the 7 Sermons as a star, and to do so, he must ignore another god, Apraxas, a god who he describes as the effective itself, not a particular effect, but the effective in general. Apraxas is the biggest inspiration behind Sithis and Parome, at least as they are presented in Morrowind. Let me read the part that interests us for the sake of understanding the last sermon of Dildris. Also, the observant among you might notice some subtle Vivekisms in there as well. At immeasurable distance standeth one single star in the zenith. This is the one God of this one man. This is his world, his pleroma, his divinity. In the this world is man Abraxas, the creator and destroyer of his own world. This that is the God and the goal of man. This is his one guiding God. In him goeth man to his rest. Toward him goeth the long journey of the soul after death. In him shineth forth as light all that man bringeth back from the greater world. To this one God man shall pray. Between man and his one God there standeth nothing, so long as man can turn away his eyes from the flaming spectacle of Abraxas. Humans carry within them a will that becomes a divine force that guides them towards their final destination, and to reach that destination, people must become their own Abraxas so that they may destroy and create their own truths. Furthermore, to reach that will, that star, people must turn away from the spectacle of Abraxas, from the effective's lies about the material world. There is a use in Abraxas. However, the effective itself should not be the end goal. There are so many parallels to everything we said up until this point, from humans being guided by stars, sounding a lot like Nemoli and the other Magnagi, from becoming a destroyer to give rise to new truths, to following your true will to reach the Pleroma. Pleroma is Greek for totality or richness, by the way. Basically, Anu. All of these insights have been the ones we've been talking about throughout the last X amount of hours. So now, with all that in mind, let's keep reading Sermon 12. In the glorious Nern ensuing, we must exercise the gleaming apparition we call I. Only then can we know the sublime truth of the mainspring Everwound. We must walk change's road if we seek the end of disorder, and like all roads worth walking, it fills our hearts with joy and terror. Yeah, exactly what we just said in the 7 Sermons to the Dead. The reason why I decided to place the sermons first was because, from the online discourse I have seen, people seem to get confused at this point. Deldris has been going on and on about namelessness and abandoning notions of selfhood and embracing fully the total submission of individual consciousness in order to become one with Anu, who is everything and everyone. But here's the deal: if everyone has within him a small spark of Anu, where else would they find Anu if not within themselves? And now he says that people need to practice their will in order to find the truth of the mainspring Everwound. And I think that with the perspective given by the 7 Sermons to the Dead, this becomes a lot more understandable. Someone's will is the bridge between the material world and divinity, and when that divinity is reached, the will transcends itself. According to Deldris, people must become destroyers, and in doing so, they will change. And change can be exciting, scary, joyous, maybe all the above, but it's also inevitable. Isn't this the Sijic endeavor that Vivek talked about? So in that way, what happened with the Edada was also inevitable, which is why right after she says all this, she says this: how alike the Edada gears we are, content to live our lives in vain and sequestered sorrow, all while oblivious to the anguished cries of our fractured souls. Look upon the lonely shores of Nern. What do you see with your broken eyes? One beach? One sea? Deceit and vanity, the name delusion. For what is a beach, if not a desperate agglomeration of isolated grains? What is a sea, if not a churning mass of solitary tears? Desperate, broken, arrogant and futile. Now we're back to schedule. Deldris is once again talking about the nature of suffering people experience in the mortal world. All of it is a result of the lies we've been told, as in the ones that Lorcan said, and the ones that came after that as a result of it. These lies have created simulacrums of false forms, whose purpose is to distract mortals from the greater truth that has been kept hidden from them. A sea isn't a sea, and a beach isn't a beach. All of these terms are products of flawed comprehensions, named delusions, of isolated parts molded together into one singular false term, a sea. A sea is just as separate and misaligned as a broken vase or shattered glass, but due to the simulacrums mortals have subjected themselves to, these terms appear to be whole, when in reality, the only thing that can be whole is Anu through Sothasil. But people still hung on to these name delusions. On that, Deldris says this: even after meditating upon these sermons, there are some among you who cling to the Nern prior. You fear the loss of your thin and impoverished self. You must cast aside these childish fears. What good is a self if it burns away at the threshold of what awaits beyond time? Do you not see that the Father of Mysteries seeks to usher us through the end, to protect us from the lies made flesh who seek to destroy us? According to Deldris, the self isn't all that it's hyped to be. It cannot survive what exists beyond time. The world will end in one way or another. This is a crucial point in Mankar's and Vivek's teachings as well. So chances are, it's gonna happen. All that Sothasil is trying to do is usher the people through the end into something new and everlasting. You have to feel bad for Dildris here. She's so close to putting things together fully. That is what Sothasil is trying to do, 100%. Set is trying to give a way for everyone to exist beyond the mortal world. It sucks that she can't come to the realization that, you know what, maybe Sothasil wasn't the only one trying to give people a way out. It can be observed that her love of Sothasil blinded her to any other perspectives. Much like Mankar, she's almost there, but her contempt of other perspectives is keeping her from completely putting things together. This is why Vivek keeps harping on about love being so important. If you remember only one thing, let it be this: our blessed clockwork god loves you with a fierce and awesome heart. What he does for you and for all who would follow his divine example. Lasting joy, the peace of unity, the sublime satisfaction of perfect rhythm. These are the products of our honest labors, the spokes of our blessed wheel that spins eternal. The mainspring ever wound offers perfection. Child of Set, you have but to gaze within, stoke your coals, add fresh water to your boilers, tighten your bolts, and believe Tamriel final awaits. Anu Vanasi. And these are the last words that Dildris Mulvane ever put to paper, and sometime after that, she died. I really think she meant everything she wrote. Yeah, it just so happened that a lot of it perfectly aligned with her own agenda as the de facto governor of the Clockwork City, but I think she really believed in Anu Vanasi. And here in the end, I want to give one last perspective about Anu Vanasi. We have talked about it so far, treating it like an amalgamation of everything, and in that sense, it makes sense why the Torbjorn kept comforting people about how scary this process can be. But notice how here, in these last few lines, it kinda seems like she figured it out. So far, she has only said stuff in the lines of, you have to listen to Sothasil, you have to live in the Clockwork City, there is no other way, that kind of thing. But now she talks about gazing within. So maybe, just maybe, all of these teachings hide a truer meaning behind them that we only just gotten a glimpse of. It sounds a lot like something Vivek would say in Sermon 37 or Mankar's final line in Commentary 4. So here's the last theory. The very end goal of the truth in sequence is exactly what the name suggests. The books themselves are simulacra that leads to Kim and Amaranth. With this logic, Anu is all, therefore all are Anu, meaning that the enlightenment of the self is the enlightenment of Anu, the enlightenment of all. Maybe all along, Dildris was advising us to look beyond our own restraints and to realize our true selves, but instead of naming anyone in particular, she named everyone Anu. Therefore, Anu Vanasi does not mean Anu's enlightenment from Sothasil, but instead it means Sothasil's attempt to enlighten us, our enlightenment through Sothasil. With this logic, Dildris has fully understood Sothasil all along. Sothasil made Nemoli so that everyone can have a chance to ascend, and he said to protect Tamriel so that this can be possible. And now the Torbjorn has done the same by creating the truth in sequence so that all the fragments of Anu can embark on a process of self-enlightenment. There is a collective, but not in the way we've thought of it. Up until this point, the collective exists within every person as much as it exists at the world at large. It's a strange amalgamation of every idea we've talked about so far. This has been the most consistent theme throughout this entire journey. There is one God and he exists in all of us. I guess this text more so elevates that idea even higher. Think of how difficult letting go of your past self is. Vivek started screaming and questioning the world altogether when it was time for him to encounter Nemoli. Mankar couldn't even do it fully and he was tortured by Dagon. Dildris is trying to ease people into this process, not by killing them or torturing them, well, not killing them and not torturing them too much, and not by maliciously lying to them. She is giving people simulacra of the truth in the form of these sermons so that they can put 1 and 2 together and look within themselves to find their Anu and enlighten themselves using these teachings. Yeah, I know it's kinda late into the video to throw theories like this around, but it's honestly a pretty conclusive theory. It helps wrap everything together and it goes full circle back to the beginning of these sermons in a beautiful way. Hey, do you want to know something funny? There isn't a single mention of any other Torbjorns in the Clockwork City throughout the entirety of ESO, a time where Sothasil gets captured, and for the first time, people are starting to doubt him vocally. Not a single Torbjorn shows up, and aside from Dildris, there isn't a single other named Torbjorn, despite her being the 4th one. In fact, I'm gonna give you a behind the scenes about this video. I went this entire video thinking Dildris was a he. It sounds like a male's name to me, but somewhere along the way, I started started questioning whether it's a he or a she, and then I found that there is another Dunmer in Morrowind called Eldris, and that one is a female, which goes to show we know nothing about this character. I doubt anyone in the Clockwork City has ever seen her. The only thing we know is that apparently they were the only named Torbjorn of the Clockwork City, and they wrote the truth in sequence. So I think that the truth in sequence is at the very least a pure expression of Eldris's will. Just how Sothasil made memory, she wrote the truth in sequence. This is her attempt to enlighten everyone about the greater scheme of things. And whether you think that these sermons have some sinister, self-fulfilling undertones, or that they call for the creation of a all-encompassing, nameless collective, or even that they call for everyone to look inside themselves to find the God within them and unite with said God, one cannot help but notice how awesome all of this is. Thank you so much for watching this video. You can see me right now, but I'm doing a Japanese bow in front of my microphone out of pure gratitude for watching this video all the way through. I don't think, sincerely, that I will ever make a video as complicated as this ever again on this channel. This video has more research to it, more citations to it, a larger bibliography to it, and 4 times the word count than the dissertation I made during my final university year. In the realm of research, I don't think I can ever top this. That's it, I peaked. And no, I have voiced several times that I really don't think that the Elder Scrolls 6 is gonna have any lore like this. If I'm honest, I think that the Elder Scrolls 6 is probably gonna lean more on the hype and aura moments from Skyrim, and even less on concepts from Morrowind. And with the current state of writing at ZeniMax, we can only hope that no one attempts to... The talent has left, boys. The people who wrote those characters no longer work at the company. Unless new talent comes that is actually talented, I fear the worst is yet to come. But we still have the mods. Maybe one day Vicent can finish Glenmoriel and we can finally look upon the blue star in person and try to reach it. I guess time will tell, and there will be more massive lore videos. I just don't think that their subject matter will be as diverse and as complicated as basic laws of thermodynamics to Neoplatonism. And thank you to all the very patient members of the Woodlands who supported this video despite their better judgment. Thank you for sticking with me on this one, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye. Huh, this truth in sequence thing is pretty good. Maybe ESO has some good lore after all. Let me see what they're cooking now.